Development Agency, Mr. Pascal Gatu, for being here this morning and for supporting the Nigerian copyright industries. I would also like to welcome um, my colleague and co-host today, Mr. Chijioke from PwC. Thank you very much for being here. And for all who have honored the invitation today from various organizations and various stakeholders in the Nigerian cultural and creative industries. And also for those of you who are joining us virtually online, thank you very much for being here this morning. My name is Isioma Idibe, and I head the media and entertainment law practice at Punuka Attorneys and Solicitors. And we, as well as PwC here present, have been working with the French Development Agency for the last year on various research projects concerning the Nigerian creative and cultural industries. So our discussion here today would be essentially talking about how an efficient copyright framework is critical to unlocking the economic value of the Nigerian cultural and creative industries. And it would be, general discussions and also presenting some of the information that we've uncovered in the course of these studies. So without further ado, I would like to bring forward the DG of the French Development Agency here in Nigeria, Mr. Pascal Gatu, for his opening address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isioma. Icaro, Inakwana, Ebolachi. Bonjour, good morning. The General Director of the National Copyright Commission, the participants to this seminar, members from CMOs, representatives of Punuka Law Firm and PwC, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. The French Development Agency, AFD, supports development projects in Nigeria that encourage economic growth and employment. The cultural and creative industry, CCI, is an important but underrated sector of the Nigerian economy. The CCI is key to youth employment and central to develop social and human capital. And I would say above all, the cultural and creative industry is essential to promote a positive image of Nigeria to investors and to the rest of the world. Our CCI mandate in Nigeria is to support the cultural sector through 4 pillars: entrepreneurship, governance, capacity building, and infrastructures. Today, we are addressing the first 2 pillars, namely entrepreneurship and governance, as they are interlinked. Regarding entrepreneurship, AFD has funded an in-depth review undertaken by PwC to identify sustainable subsectors of cultural and creative industries to assess their financing needs. And for governance, AFD has funded a diagnostic study carried out by Punuka Law Firm and KPMG on the functioning of copyright protection in Nigeria. Ensuring that musicians, authors, and more generally, right owners have access to a long-term and sustainable source of revenues rather than one-off payments for the commercial exploitation of their works is central to develop the economic value of the cultural and creative industry. This would facilitate access to further financing opportunities with potential collateralization of intellectual property rights. However, as you may already know, the transparency of the system has to be improved dramatically at many levels, including the collection of royalties from users, the way distribution of royalties to right holders for their actual work is done, the compliance with existing regulations and decisions from the NCC. This seminar has been organized today to present to you the findings of PwC and PUNUCA. Whether you represent a ministry, a public institution, right owners, CMOs, banks, or the cultural and creative industry in general, we would like to ask you to participate actively today and in the future, as our common goal should be to do what is necessary to recreate confidence into the system. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a creative seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pascal Gratu. I would like to invite the Director General of the Nigerian Copyright Commission to give his opening address.
Good morning, everyone. And good morning to those who are joining us virtually. Well, mine is just to share a few thoughts by way of opening remarks. But first, to thank AFD, thank PUNUCA, and everyone who has contributed and helped to see this study through. I haven't read all of the study, but certainly it gives us something to interrogate, and certainly something that will help the copyright system in Nigeria, and particularly help the collective management system to benefit the copyright industry. Collective management is not new in Nigeria, although I'm not sure anyone knows the exact age of collective management in Nigeria, but I think it's as old as Nigeria has been since independence. Because at independence, we already had the PRS system running, and by virtue of their coverage of Nigerian space, they were already responsible for Nigeria. But we know that from about 1974, when MCSN got its agency from PRS, we could begin to date CMO operations in Nigeria. It's interesting that when the 1970 Act was promulgated, there was just an almost indiscernible mention of what was to touch on CMO operations in Nigeria. This is very important because we'll now see that it wasn't until about 1992 that we began to address the operations of CMOs directly. And when in 1993, the Commission rolled out the first regulation of collecting societies in Nigeria, and in 2007 rolled out the second set of regulations, we've not really had this kind of diagnostic study. We've not had a thorough interrogation of the system and to identify the gaps and what solutions we need to put in place. That's why for us at the Nigerian Copyright Commission, this study is welcome. Interestingly, the first regulation from the Nigerian Copyright Commission was in 1993. The second was in 2007, and that would be about 14-year gap. And here we are at the threshold of another 14 years, which will be next year. So assuming we're taking that long circle of 14 years, it will be due for some revision. But more than that, I think we should begin a system of more frequent, more periodic examination of collective management in Nigeria and finding solutions in what could be at the most a 7-year cycle. But I think we can do less than even 7 years so that we have constant interrogation and constant dialogue with the CMO organizations. This is important for us because the new template we're operating is to have regulations and regulatory functions that add value to the regulated and brings maximum benefit to the beneficiaries or the primary right holders in that industry. So in the case of CMOs, we've said it over and over that the essence of regulation is to ensure that CMOs are able to comply with well-known rules of good governance, ensuring that they are responsible, they are responsive in their delivery of services, and to ensure that we provide a system that is very efficient or more efficient. And of course, we also want to hold the CMOs accountable just as we want them to be transparent. So for us, for a CMO in Nigeria to be able to deliver on its mandate, it should obey the rules of good governance. It should be responsive and responsible. It should be efficient in its operations. It should be accountable, and it should be transparent in its dealings. So these are the cardinal points that we want to take along as we begin to look at the next review of the CMO regulation in Nigeria. And I can promise the industry that soon and very soon, using the outcome of this study, which I mean will really, really help us, using the outcome and best practices, we should begin, or rather we should resume, because we had actually started the revision process, we should resume the process of recalibrating the regulations and ensuring that we have a CMO regulation that will enable us to deliver maximally to the creative sector. What we experienced during the COVID pandemic and the lockdown has shown the need for CMOs to be more responsive in a way that right owners will always have something to look up to no matter the disruptions in their businesses. And we have seen recently a lot of right owners who, upon retiring from the business or leaving some estates, will now find that they have to depend on their creative enterprise and investment as a way of ensuring that their assets, are able to benefit their estates as they pass on. So we want to ensure that these deliverables are brought to bear in our policies and in the regulation that will be coming. Now, the report certainly will not please everyone, and that's the good thing about studies. We'll have points of disagreement. Even the Nigerian Copyright Commission will likely have areas where it will disagree, but certainly there will be more to benefit the system and the entire industry if we critically and look at the study and we adopt a positive attitude towards it. No matter what we think about this study, it is a defining study in Nigeria. It is setting the bar for law-making and policy initiatives, and certainly there will be so much in there that will benefit the creative sector, not just in one industry like music or film or literary, the ones you've studied, but we still have those that have not even come on board, like the visual arts sector, that also will be thinking of a CMO that will benefit them. So no matter what we think, I would advise that we should interrogate strongly, we should ask questions, we should be very open, should be very critical, but I don't think we'll ever want to throw the baby away with any bath water, no matter how what we think about the bath water. In this particular case, I would thank AFD for the support, and I hope this will be another step in what will be a growing relationship to ensure that we bring to bear all the support that is required to strengthen the creative industry and ensure that right owners get maximum benefit for all the sweat and all the labor of years past. Thank you very much. And once again, I thank the consultant for what I think will be a good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Quickly, for us to move quickly, I would like to bring onto the stage my colleague and fellow consultants on these projects, which have been funded by the French Development Agency, Mr. Chijioke Uwabote, who is the head of the Creative Industry Desk West Africa at PwC, and is also a partner at PwC in-source solutions for tax. Please welcome Mr. Chijioke as they present the findings of their study on the creative and cultural industries in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
So, good morning, everybody, and I'll stand on the existing protocols. While we wait for technology to catch up with us, I think for me, PwC as a firm, our partnership with AFD in trying to, drive the growth and structure of the creative industry in Nigeria is a very important one, given the size of the industry, given the importance of the industry. And, in our presentation, we'll be talking about these very specific items, which for me is critical for us to kind of continue building on. We talk about engagement of individuals, talk about, job creation in Nigeria. And you ask yourself the question, if you have an industry that is the second largest employer of labor, right? You have an industry that is possibly growing at a rate that is multiples of the rate of the growth of the economy. You'd ask yourself the question, why are we not paying enough attention to this industry? Why haven't we created the structure? Why haven't we brought in place the policies that would help drive the growth of this industry? So some of the things we put out in our report, obviously financing was a big issue for the creatives, access to finance. Even if you do get that finance and you do put together a project, right? How are you able to get the right kind of returns that will then justify the cost of the finance? And to the extent that the government has done a lot with regards to trying to support the industry, I guess the biggest question is, this industry we are trying to support, do we even know the industry? Do we even understand how the industry functions? So I put the question out to the policymakers. Do we understand this industry properly? I've been in a public forum where I was engaging with a very senior government official, and we're talking about financing the film industry in Nigeria. And we're talking about the film industry, the prospects, the growth and everything. And his response was, wait, so this Nollywood people, is it not Aki and Popo? And to be honest, I didn't feel bad because that was the level of his understanding, and that was let him know that Nollywood is not just Aki and Popo. That's the truth. Nollywood is a whole lot more than that. It's a huge industry that churns out movies. I mean, depending on which data you're looking at, they say Nollywood is the second largest, producer of films in Nigeria. sorry, in the world. Even though you ask yourself, what is the value of Nollywood versus other people that it produces more films than, you know? So for me, it's really important that as we discuss about the cultural and creative industries in Nigeria, and we try to put together policies and everything in place for this industry, you know, the policymakers need to understand the industry. The policymakers need to understand the potential of the industry and how the industry can grow. And that's what I'm hoping, that engagements like this will start to create the platform where the policymakers can engage a bit more with the professionals in the industry to kind of take the industry forward. Isham, I don't know how much more time. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Maybe what I'll do, I'll just use my laptop and start looking at it. Okay. We live in a world of technology, so please forgive us. Okay, wonderful. The clicker isn't working. Okay, that's fine. I'll just keep saying next. Okay. So my presentation is on the economic value of the cultural and creative industry to the Nigerian economy. And essentially, we'll be going through, next, guys, next. So we'll be going through an overview of the cultural and creative industry. We'll be looking at the contributions of the cultural and creative industry to the economy. We'll look at general challenges impacting the cultural and creative industry. Then we'll just have a brief spotlight on intellectual property and essentially its impact on the industry as well. And then a few concluding remarks as well. Next, please. So the CCI is constantly evolving, and Africa has the potential to become one of the most vibrant and fastest growing creative economies in the world. Now, if we think about the creative industry and how we have kind of defined it, right? You know, it has, if you look at the different categories of animation and VFX, that's visual effects, publishing, video games, architecture, heritage and museums. I mean, just a whole lot of them, right? But obviously, when we are thinking of cultural and creative industry in Nigeria, we think of the big three. We think of movies, we think of fashion, we think of music. But there's a whole lot more, and I like what the DG said, you know, talking about visual arts and do we need to kind of create a bit more structure around it. There's a whole lot happening across board. But the sad thing about it is that a lot of the people operating in these sectors are informal. So they are not within a structured environment. That's one thing we need to look at. Now, if you look at some numbers around the cultural and creative industry, the sector contributes 2.25 trillion in revenues, or 3% of global GDP, and exports about $250 billion worth of content per annum. Now, think about these numbers. 3% of global GDP is coming from the cultural and creative industries. And that's sort of also, if you start looking at it from a Nigerian perspective, we're also ranking at around 3% of the Nigerian GDP. If you look at MBS numbers, you see that this industry is also around 3% of GDP. So we're kind of playing at the global level as well. Now, although Africa, we account for less than 1% of this, and if you look at our numbers, 22.5 billion, even though for me, I don't quite agree with these numbers, even though it's coming from the United Nations and, you know, it's information they have. But one of the biggest problems we have in this industry is what? Data. Being able to say, do we have the right amount of data relating to significant amount of people that operate in this are operating outside a formalized environment so that you don't even have data on them. So right now, the number we're looking at, for instance, $4 billion for the informal creative economy in Africa, that is not correct. In my view, I think it's a whole lot more. And then you can't tell me that 18% of the entire creative industry is informal. I would say the number will trend at about 50 to 60% being informal and outside a formalized structure. So that's why we need data. And it's important that we start looking at how do we start funding studies that will actually give us the right data on this industry so that it even gives people that want to finance or people that want to invest in this industry a bit more information around what is the real size of this industry. So I was talking to Paulo and I gave him a wink, and unfortunately I can't wink properly, but Paulo, think about it, and Pascal, in terms of, do we need to start looking towards funding a study? And I have Uche here as well. And Uche knows that I've told her this every time. Uche, we need to fund a study that will give us the right level of data around the size of this industry, the cultural and creative industry. So, but obviously, you know, with our diverse cultural base and the different languages, the different cultures, it creates a vibrancy that you can't find anywhere in the world. And this is part of the things that primarily drive the innovation that you see in this industry, from a Nigerian standpoint and an African standpoint. Now, let's look at a few numbers. Now, if you look to the right, I mean, obviously, this is some of the information that we've tried to get from different sources and try to extrapolate. Obviously, the market size as at 2018, in our view, is in the range of $18 billion. If you look at contributions to GDP versus other industries, I think we're punching above our weight in the cultural and creative industry, if you ask me. Even though we're ranging in this range of about 3 to 4%. Look at financial institutions. You know, look at real estate, look at oil and gas. Agriculture, yes, obviously will always play big, 21%. Oil and gas, what? In a year, in 2015, oil and gas contributed just 1% more than the cultural and creative industry. Now, oil and gas, agriculture, all these guys have a lot of data, so it's easy to kind of put out their data and say this is the size of that industry. I don't think we have as much data as we should. So really, are we really 3% of Nigeria's GDP? If we're the second highest employer of labor, this is food for thought to say, are we really looking at this industry in the right manner? So we've talked about growth. So let's look at some other countries and compare Nigeria to some other countries. Next, please, next. So let's look at some other countries and let's compare Nigeria to some other countries. The United Kingdom. So these are 2018 figures. Over 2 million creative jobs, over 284,000 creative businesses. Now let's look at the contribution to the economy, 191 billion. Okay? In 2018, it was a 7.4% growth rate, meaning the cultural and creative industries grew 5% faster than the rate of growth of the economy of the United Kingdom. And the UK could be the world's creative hub by 2025 because they are putting a lot of focus into the cultural and creative industry. Let me throw out another statistic. As at 2018, the cultural and creative industry was contributing £13 million every hour to the economy. 13 million pounds. Let me do a back of the envelope calculation in Naira. That's about, if I'm using 600, maybe about 7.8 billion every hour. Let's let that sink in a little bit. Cultural and creative industry was contributing 13 million pounds every hour to the economy. Let's look at another country, France. France, about a $1.3 million creative jobs, 300,000 creative businesses, about 109 billion, which is 2.3% of GDP. Average growth rate, 6.7%. Okay? And you ask yourself the question, these are countries that, if you ask me, I'm sorry you're here, Paolo, I'm sorry you're here, Pascal, but if you ask me, I think there's this significantly more potential in Nigeria than in these countries. It's easier to export what we have. I mean, they keep telling you about go to any nightclub in the US or anywhere. What do you see? You hear Nigerian music, right? Our actors are becoming global. Our fashion sense, everything about us is becoming global. And there's this whole sense of trying to connect back with the culture of Africa. And we're one of the biggest, right? Brazil, just over 1 million creative jobs. This is information as at a couple of years ago. 200,000 creative businesses, about 29 billion, which is 2.64% of GDP. Compare that to Nigeria. We are just over 1 million creative jobs. Based on the information we're able to get, I think that's a whole lot more. But based on the information we're able to get, just about over 1 million creative jobs. Second largest employer in Nigeria after agriculture. About 18 billion in terms of size. See, compound annual growth rate of 12.1%. I asked myself the question, comparing Nigeria to the UK, comparing Nigeria to France, is there any reason why we can't have an industry that at least contributes, even if it's 1 billion naira every hour? In the first instance. And this is real food for thought to say, we talk about youth engagement. We talk about there's so much going on. We want to engage youth. We want to drive some kind of job creation and the rest. But the jobs are being created. The jobs are there. But the question is, be able to harness the potential to be able to grow the industry. That's the question. So if you look at some of we tried to throw up some figures. I still think that we need to spend a bit more money to look into getting the data, the right kind of data. But we've put out some figures here. For instance, I like this figure. Nigeria is said to account for 15% of sub-Saharan Africa's $31 billion fashion market. Think about it. In terms of visual arts, I'm even hearing that Sotheby's and other British fashion auction houses are actually looking to have like Africa type art auctions where Nigerian artists are actually featuring prominently, right? Visual arts, the value of our visual arts is going up. And the truth is, we're all naturally creative people in Nigeria. I'm sure everybody here, has one or two creative aspects to them that they've even done in the past that they let go. That if they had continued, they probably would be on a different path than they are today. Obviously, we're looking at Nollywood generates between $500 and $800 million annually. One thing Nollywood will always tell you is this: we got where we were without anybody's help. That we were really driving ourselves to push ourselves to where we are. Same with the music industry. They'll say we continued, we kept trying, we kept pushing till we got to a point where we are what we are now. Imagine where we are able to now put in place the right policies and the framework to guide the growth of these industries. And if you look at it, the value chain, think about the value chain of the industry, right? Sorry. Okay. I'll go on. Okay, so think about the value chain of the industry as well. Everything we do in the industry, there's value being created everywhere, right? You know, whether it's in music, whether it's in film, whether it's in fashion, architecture, visual arts, there's a value chain and there are people creating value. And because of our interactions as individuals, this value chain creates a bit of innovation, right? So a typical film set would have people that need to cook the food, you will have people that need to, that welfare people, you have people that have to do the makeup, hair, whatever. There are different, a typical film set might have up to 200 people on it. Aside the different businesses that it touches as well. You then start as, well, let's go back, please. Please go back. Yes, no, next slide. Yes, just stay here, please. So if you start looking at the value chain, look at the people in the value chain, the interaction of people in the value chain, it creates a lot of innovation. A lot of people, there are jobs that are available today that were not available 5 years ago. There are jobs that are available today that were not available 1 year ago. All of a sudden, we have jobs like social media managers. Those jobs never used to exist, right? But they are here today. And we tell ourselves that we cannot create jobs from this creative industry. That's impossible. That's impossible. We are creating jobs every day, but we haven't created a structure that will enable a proper growth of those jobs and rewards for those jobs as well. So that's what we need to start asking ourselves. This intricate mix of interactions between the players is a dominant factor that continues to power the sector's innovative capacity. Tomorrow, as we speak, today is what, 23rd of November. By 23rd of November next year, I'm sure there'll be 10 new jobs, 50 new jobs, job titles in the creative industry that were not there before. I can assure you of that because these things keep coming up. Somebody will just create one new role called, I don't know, maybe for the fashion industry, maybe it'll be a job called a buttonhole reviewer or something. I'm sorry? Oh, buttonhole reviewer is already there. Oh, see what we're saying? Okay, maybe the reviewer of the buttonhole reviewer. But I can tell you that because of this innovation and engagement, they constantly have to innovate. And they constantly see opportunities. And because we have such a young population, that's why this growth is happening. But are they really being engaged? Which is why let's look at the general challenges impacting us. So let's start with intellectual property protection. Piracy remains the next. Okay. So piracy remains a big business. We all know that, and we've talked about this. I don't need to spend too much time on piracy, but we need to kind of start looking at how do we implement our copyright laws and essentially what is the impact of you going against the laws in this regard. So what's the consequence? What's the consequence of piracy, right? Funding. Funding continues to be the problem, you know. Even though we've contributed an average of 5% to GDP between 2014 and 2018, there's very little engagement with the financial institutions. The banks are just learning today how to even fund the industry. And at the end of the day, what do they see? Oh, it's, okay, let's go and look at the films. Let's go and look at this. Let's go and look at that. I think, you know, the Bank of Industry continues to do a phenomenal job in what they are doing. But it's just one. And is that enough? Is Bank of Industry going to fund us into growth? I don't think they can do that alone. It's a combination of things that need to happen. You know, limited resources and skills. We don't have the skills. There's a lot of what we do is raw skills, raw talent. You know, people learn on the job. A lot of people will tell you that they've learned this thing going along. Thankfully, there's, you know, YouTube is helping people to learn a whole lot more. But there's no formalized structure to even start building these skills and honing these skills. You know, infrastructure continues to be a big issue here. You know, I was having an interesting conversation earlier today. You know, so we're talking about infrastructure deficits. Now, I know the government has the road infrastructure tax credit, for instance. So someone says you build a road, you know, you get a tax credit for the amount you spent on building the road, right? So that's the president has signed the presidential order for over the next 10 years. Great initiative. But let's come back to the creative industry, right? In the state of Georgia, USA, all you need to do to get a tax credit for your investment in film in Georgia is what? You know that plum? There's this plum that you must put that plum. So you see any production in Georgia, USA, there's normally a plum at the end of the production, right? Which kind of says it was supported by the Georgia Film Corporation. That gives you an extra 10%. Meanwhile, they're already giving you a 20% tax credit. So on your investment in a film in the state of Georgia, you're getting 30% of that your investment back as a tax credit, which you can sell. Now think about cinema infrastructure and other infrastructure that we can build in Nigeria, but you're not getting anything out of it. So why can't government, for instance, have a creative industry infrastructure tax credit? So that if I go and build 100 cinemas, I can get that money back through a tax credit. Because you want people to produce films. Where are they going to put the films? Which cinema are they going to put their film in? Or you want them, okay, there's so much internet. Okay, we can put it on the internet. Oh, really? So what about the cost of data, availability of data, and people being able to stream? Okay? So the question I ask is, why can't the cultural and creative industry, if the policymakers understood the industry properly, it's not about giving out loans to people. I go and take a loan. Take a loan to do what? Create a factory where I can produce things, where I don't have light. I have to power myself to deliver my goods to the market. I'm having a difficulty doing that. Being able to get the market to even sell my goods to. Meanwhile, I have to pay back that loan at an interest. It's not going to work. These are the things that came out of our own study. Like, okay, you're giving us a loan. Then what? There's no business, and I still have to pay that loan back. In fact, it was only cash-heavy businesses that could pay the loans back. If you're not a cash-heavy business, you can't pay that government loan. So give me, loans at great terms, but that's not the answer. Which is why I still go back to, do the policymakers understand the industry? Okay. Inadequate government support. So talking about incentives and ease of doing business policies to stimulate the private sector to invest in the industry. Think about it. Why would I put money in a fashion venture? Why would a big firm put money in a cinema venture or any other venture that could, contribute to the growth? Why would I do that? When there's uncertainty in my returns, I'm paying high taxes, there's a high cost of operations. So if we really want to tackle this industry the way it is, it's not by just throwing money at it. It's about taking a step back and asking ourselves, what kind of policies do we need to put in place to ensure the growth of this industry? So obviously there's, next would really be COVID. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on COVID. Hopefully we're all getting out of COVID and the vaccines have come through and the rest. But sorry, I'm controlling. Yeah. Can you go to the next? Okay, yeah, leave it there. Okay, good. So, but we'll just talk a little bit about COVID. Obviously, there's been an impact of COVID and what has happened with COVID. But interestingly, I asked the question, right? In the UK, because of the structure and the fact that they brought the creative industry into a more formalized setting, it was easy for the players in the industry to get money from government, right? So if I remember, at a point, there was a 3-month grant to them to be able to, operate in this period. So I think it was £2,300 on a monthly basis. Now, if you ask why were they able to do that, they know you, you're in the system, you pay taxes, so they already know who you are. They already know, they are able to connect with you, and they're able to what? Give you back. Now, we've been talking about billions and billions of dollars. And I asked the question, how much of it is being paid in taxes? So it's a two-way thing. While we're talking about the government, right, and what the government needs to do, we're also talking about the players in the industry too. How many of them pay the right taxes? How many of them are willing to come into a formalized structure that would allow government to be able to do what they need to do, or private investors to be able to do what they need to do? How many of them? You want a US company to come and invest in you, you don't have the right level of governance, you're not paying taxes. If they do a due diligence on you, they'll see that there are significant exposures for them, and you think you're the kind of company they want to do business with. If we look at other sectors, oil and gas and the rest, when they are getting foreign investors, by the time they come and I do a lot of due diligences for foreign investments. And it's very easy to be able to do that because you have someone who's already paying taxes, he's already within a formalized structure. So it's easy to attract foreign investments to yourself. But where you have no structure, you have no means of saying, this is who I am, this is how much taxes I've paid and everything. How do you expect to attract that investment? Then you also expect government to give you a palliative. So they were talking about the creative industry. There was this feedback from government that they wanted to give palliatives to them. Who are you giving palliatives? Who? And by the way, are you going to use the money I pay as a taxpayer to give palliatives out without necessarily asking yourself who you're giving it to and whether those people have actually contributed to that pot of tax that they are getting the palliatives from? So it's a two-way thing. So if people in the creative industry need to start thinking about themselves as big businesses as well. So there's a bit of education on the both sides, both from the government side and the players in the industry as well. So COVID did a lot to expose us. Let's be honest. It did a lot to expose us in terms of even financial management. A lot of people went broke. A lot of people went bust because of the correct financial management, correct governance, correct business structures that are adaptable. So I don't want to spend too much time on COVID, but it was something that made us sit up and realize that we're not there. And have we even solved the problem? I don't think so. I don't know what came out of the engagement between government and the industry, whether there was some formalized structure that will enable government to even know the players in the industry, know how much they are contributing, and know the basis to be able to support them in the event that we have this kind of catastrophic event again. Okay? This last point really for me is intellectual property. A functional intellectual property environment will be key towards overcoming some of the challenges associated with finance for the CCI. And I'm going to spend my time to go through all these ones. Current impact of IP infringements today. Creditworthiness of the industry practitioners. Oh, sorry. I keep forgetting the clicker. My apologies, people. That's a problem, it's not. Can you just move it for me, please? You need to expand it. Yes, IP. Okay. Okay, thank you. So a functional IP environment is critical as far as I'm concerned. And if you start looking at the current impact, it impairs the creditworthiness of the industry as practitioners are unable to capture all the value and returns from projects required to meet up with the loan repayment obligations. How do you even value intellectual property? It limits the attractiveness of industry for investment purposes as investors are not guaranteed returns on investments. And if you look at the contribution of the industry to the Nigerian economy and the overall growth of the industry, practitioners are discouraged, right? You know, I have no means of valuing intellectual property. I have no basis to be able to even determine what is the real value of this. And how would a functional copyright environment impact the CCI? Aid the acceptance of intellectual property as collateral for loans. Which, can you hear me? I like looking for Uche's trouble because for one reason, I've been pushing since BOI. Can we not start thinking about collateralizing our IP so that we're able to do that? But obviously we are far away from it. But it's not an impossibility, because if we look at global best practices as well, why can't we bring it down here? Boost practitioners' confidence and enhance competition in the industry. It would enhance the attractiveness of the industry and attract investors if we're able to do it properly, and improve the growth of the industry and overall improve the industry's contribution to the growth of the Nigerian economy. Imagine if we are able to value our copyright properly. Imagine how far we could go. And that is why a functional copyright environment is extremely, extremely important to the cultural and creative industry. And we need to move with the times. We can't continue staying on all brick and mortar kind of thinking. We need to kind of move with the times and start asking ourselves, how well are we doing from a standpoint of moving with the times? I mean, we're long overdue to be able to value IP and use that as a basis for, either investor engagement, loans, or the rest, any other things we need to do. Okay? And for me, it's a collaborative effort, really, for us to be able to grow the cultural and creative industry. It's a collaborative effort, from the regulators to the industry partnerships, professional guilds and associations, industry society. This is not exhaustive. We try to kind of put together a pyramid of, interactions. Oh, sorry, next. Oh my goodness. Next, please. Next. Okay, so we try to put together a pyramid of interactions within the industry. So between the regulators, industry partnerships, professional guilds and associations, industry societies, right? And essentially, these interactions, when done in a properly structured environment, would drive the growth we're looking for. The government policy all around this thing also becomes extremely important as well. And then obviously the partnerships with development finance institutions like AFD and the rest would also drive that growth. But ultimately, this is a collaborative effort, and we need to get it right. We need to stop what we've been doing in the past. If we keep doing the same thing all over again, you're not going to get a different result. So it's for us to kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, how do we really want to drive the growth of this industry? Do we want to continue this silo mentality of these people decide to come and they want to come and engage on their own behalf, the other people want to come and engage on their own behalf? Or do we start looking at it as more collaborative, meaning that all the players need to come together to be able to drive this growth? Because ultimately, the pie is really big. The pie is really big, which takes me to that thing I said before. In the UK, the cultural and creative industry contributes 7.8 billion naira an hour to the economy. Think about it and ask yourselves, where do we want to be? And how do we intend to get there? Thank you very much for your time. So next is really for questions. So I'm available for questions, if any. Sorry, there's a gentleman over there. He was first. Okay.
Good morning, all. My name is Husseini Muazu. I'm representing the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion, NOTAP. So my question is on the policy makers you actually mentioned quite a few times. So my question is, how do we intend to get them to review the whole industry, so that they can help in making it move forward? Yeah.
Yeah, Great question, and thank you very much. And I think you guys are doing a phenomenal job as well, in driving this. And I think you also play a very important role because obviously there will be a lot of technology transfer in our engagements in this industry, and your ability to create the kind of easy environment where I'm able to get the approvals for my technology and technical assistance projects. It becomes very important. So you guys have a significant role in the first instance. But if I want to look at it in its totality, right? I think first of all, we need to define to ourselves what our key focus areas would be in terms of looking at the cultural and creative industry. First of all, how have we even defined it? Forget the big three, and I take that back. The big three will always be the big three. They will always make money. But there's a wider CCI that we are not looking at. We're also not looking at the value chain as well and the impact of the value chain on the CCI. So for me, I think if we really want to grow this thing from a government standpoint, I think we need to have, first of all, a definition of what the industry is, a definition of the relevant stakeholders that need to be engaged with it. From a government standpoint, we have to do our stakeholder mapping to say who are the key people that need to kind of be part of this engagement. So for instance, you look at the people who are driving investment and growth, they need to be in that conversation. You know, you look at the regulators of some of the activities there, they need to be in that conversation. You need to look at the people that will also support in financing, Ministry of Finance and possibly the tax authorities as well. If we can bring those relevant stakeholders together with the relevant industry professionals to say, let's define the industry, let's map it out and define what we want to do. And we can use an example. We can say, you know what, we have a 10-year plan. We have a 10-year plan. If I keep going back to the road infrastructure tax credit, because I think it's phenomenal. You know, it's a 10-year executive order. Why can't we have the same thing for the creative industry, cultural and creative industry, where we say, over the next 10 years, we're going to put in place policies and a framework that will guide the growth of this industry, that will formalize the industry, bring the informal players in, because yes, there will always be informal players, but why don't you take the percentage down to a very small percentage so that it makes sense for you to be part of a formalized structure so you can access everything, rather being informal, flying under the radar, and you're never really going to grow. So if we can bring that together, and it's really driven by how the government sees the impact of this industry. If we can bring all of them together, give ourselves a 10-year plan for the industry with the plan of getting the industry to where it should be in 10 years, I think that's the way it should go. Obviously, but you need the right professionals in the room. It's not about bringing the players in the industry, because creatives are great, but they don't see the whole picture. So you need to also have the right professionals to support you in that, and also potentially bring in people from outside. Best practices, it's never a bad thing to also have, you know, people who have done it before to actually guide us on it as well. But it's a whole collaborative effort, for me, driven by government, if they can. I think the gentleman, I think he was, maybe you need to take numbers. Maybe you need to go and take numbers.
My name is Edi Mesri. I represent the Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria. This is of interest to us. The information you're bringing in is of great interest to the broadcast industry. But I think also that some of the problems we have relate to lack of knowledge, not only within the industry, but also from the consumers. So what I'm trying to ask is, how can we create that knowledge base for the consumer? You've gone into your research, you've produced some information, some data. I think we also need to do the same thing so that this data should be communicated to the consumer for them to know where their rights begin and where their rights end.
Absolutely.
For us, we have a lot of problems within the industry. We have problems with the regulator. We're talking about the Copyright Commission itself. We have problems with our own regulator. We have problems with the collection societies because they themselves also, even though they want to work or they're doing their job, do not know what they should do vis-a-vis broadcasters. And we have our own products that are not well paid for as our rights. So this forms a big problem for the industry. And I do think that because of lack of information, we're not able to harness all the opportunities that are available to all of us. So this is where PwC and AFD will play a much longer role. That is, you're not just going to drop or stop at this particular level, but you take it into the micro activities of each of the groups. Take fashion, take film, take broadcasting, take even computer rights, programming rights. These have not been brought in from what you presented. Because I know that all of us, we pursue, even broadcast, we pursue YouTube. Because they are regulated, that's where some of us make some income. But why can't we do that in Nigeria, where we'll have an income generating facility like that for all of us?
And that's a great point, sir. Thank you very much for that. You know, and I think you asked the question and you kind of answered it in a way. You were asking as you were talking, you were answering it in a way as well. But for me, it all goes back to where we started from in terms of being able to define that industry. Because what if I don't understand the industry well? How do I even communicate to the consumers? Because we need to be able to let the consumers know there has to be clarity. I mean, I would think, and if I put it to my good friend Paolo or Pascal, I'm sure they would say, sitting in France, I know what my rights are. I have a bit of clarity around, you know, how to engage on some of these things, right? But that is because this has been communicated properly. And if we don't get it right at the top in terms of our understanding and structure, I mean, we could use, let me give you an example, maybe audience measurement. Audience measurement. Do we have a proper audience measurement framework in Nigeria that would help us to be able to actually start extracting value from there in terms of even when we're producing content and the rest? Do we have the right audience measurement framework? I'm not aware of that, and it's possible it's there, but I haven't heard a lot about it in terms of the ratings and the rest. So there's a lot that we haven't done or that we've kind of ignored because we haven't also built the capacity at the policy-making level. That's my view. And I don't think we've also engaged properly with the industry itself to be able to now come up with using that collaborative type of pyramid I put there to kind of bring everyone together to be sure that we create the right ecosystem with the right policy direction to drive this. But we haven't. So we can talk about the consumers, but you haven't even given the consumers the information and the knowledge that they can even use to understand what their rights are. So, I don't know, how much more time do I have? How much more time do I have? Or 5 more minutes.
Hello.
So how many more questions?
Mine is more of a comment than a question. My name is Smart Twedo from NOTAP.
Yes, sir.
This is quite a study you've done. And you could do this. You are now at a point where you see all the different phases of the creative industry. You find the regulators can only see from their own perspective. And that is why I would have expected that beside the challenges, you would have given some recommendations so that we could start from there. Now, quite a number of the regulators are here. If we have a basis upon which we can work, we now can start talking to each other. And then some of those recommendations will be carried forward. Thank you.
That phenomenal point. You know, we have a full report, sir, right? There's a full report that kind of speaks to this. I think what you have is just a summary, right? But there's a full report that has, you know, obviously recommendations as well. But like I've said, you know, I think first of all, we need to define it. We as a government need to define it. We need to identify the different players and the different stakeholders and bring them together into a formalized structure that we can then use with the right level of policy to drive it. That's, for me, in a nutshell, what we need to do. And it's not rocket science, to be honest. It's not rocket science because it's been done elsewhere in the world. But great points. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Excuse me. My name is Isiaka Ajibola. I come from the Nigeria Publishers Association. Good presentation. And just to probably understand more about the opportunities in the CCI industry. There has always been a talk about CCI growing at a very high rate. Today, we are talking about 21% to contribution to gross domestic product. But one wants to know what is the contribution of each of element of CCI, for example, the book publishing industry. Because when you talk about CCI, you talk about the creative industry, you talk about the film industry, you talk about the internet, you talk about tailoring, fashion, and things like that. What are the aggregate of these contributions? For example, the book publishing industry, what is it contributing to this growth?
I obviously
so
don't have the numbers offhand, but I've told you one thing. You can only get data to the extent of what is available. And I keep saying that the foundation of everything we do is even to get data. So if I use you as the book publishing industry, for instance, are you able to say categorically the size of your industry, you know, the volumes of your industry and potential growth of the industry? And if someone wants to get into this industry, what does this is a reference point for industry or financial industry. So the foundation of everything we're doing is even data. So most of the data we extrapolate, bring together and interactions to pull data. But we don't have a great amount of data that we can actually work with. Because a lot of you are informal as well or outside a formalized structure. So how do I even get data on them? Until we start pulling everybody into a more formalized structure where the person starts seeing a bit more value coming from it. So if you ask me today, what is the value of the publishing industry? I'm sure I can go and rummage around and find something and give it to you, but is that correct? That's the real value of the industry. And if I look at the growth rate, am I able to project a growth rate for this industry?
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
My name is Amodu Augustine. I work for Copyright Commission. Mine is simple. You had a wonderful paper here. You talked about structures that could function. You did a comparative analysis of different countries side by side with Nigeria. My issue is not talk the talk. My issue is do the talk. How do we do this talk?
I think I've said it in different ways here, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. We must understand that maybe there are things that are overarching across the industries. For instance, financing is something that's probably everybody across all the industries will talk about, right? But then there are different aspects across board. Sir, are you still with me? Okay, good. So when you say do the talk, so there are different parts of how to do the talk. First of all, let's even define the industry for ourselves. Let's even get data on the industry and determine what is the real size of this industry, what are the prospects of this industry, what are the issues around the industry, barriers to entry and all that. If we get all that, first of all, then we look at the collaborations within the industry, starting from the government side. I think I've said that before. In terms of policy, what kind of policy drives the industry today? And are those policies, are they all fit for purpose? Or are those things that were put together maybe in my father's time, which are not relevant for the world of today, right? So there's also, you need to kind of look at the policy as well, the policy framework regulating this industry. Then you now need to look at what are global best practices. I used the tax incentives, for instance, and I asked myself the question, really, I want to drive the growth in this industry, and I don't have incentives that will incentivize people to put money in the industry. I've also talked about even you, the regulators. Does the government quite understand this industry and its potential? So there are a lot of things that we need to kind of put in place, and I'm happy for us to kind of look at this, a flow diagram to see how the things need to work. But if you want me to tell you today, how do I fix the entire industry? I need to know what I'm fixing. I need to know the size of what I'm fixing. I need to get people a bit more into a more formalized structure that I can then be able to kind of work with. So great points, and I think we keep saying this, but the policymakers are here. They are hearing this. I'm hoping that this will get to the right ears where we can then say, okay, you know what? Let's all take a step back and take another look at this industry through a different set of lenses. I'm hoping that's what engagements like this will come out with. Because if you ask me to give you a solution to what I don't fully understand or fully know the size of, it's going to be difficult to do that right now.
My name is Chief Kingsley Okafor. I'm the president of Professional Creative Artists in Nigeria.
Sorry, sir.
Professional Creative Artists in Nigeria.
Okay.
I believe that this forum is actually for practitioners like us. And that's why I've been eager to ask my question. And I'm happy the DG, the Copyright Commission, is here. I've looked through your records, I've looked through your research work, and it looks like most of the research bodies tend to misplace the place of the visual arts in the tabulation of the creative industry. I saw that you just glossed over and made a few line comments on the visual art, but this is the critical aspect of the creative industry. If you look at the French Louvre, which is the museum in France, the revenue is about 160 million pounds every year. Yeah. And then just one museum in France. Now, in the UK, the museums in the UK net about 1.2 billion pounds. 1.2 billion pounds in UK every year. And I don't think that the visual arts is not structured. It's just a matter of dealing with the right people. We have associations which are quite structured. But when you talk about the creative industry in Nigeria, they tend to talk about just fashion, music, and that's all about it. But the visual arts is a critical aspect of the creative industry, and it's a matter of bringing them together to actually structure them together. So I want to know why most research bodies like yours tend to gloss over the visual arts. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, my apologies if you feel this way, but I'll say you're incorrect. Because if you look at the full study, we have a full section on the visual arts. In fact, I even had to go and present, sorry, excuse me, sir. Okay, I even had to go and present this at one of the events that were held at the Mike Adenuga Center, you know, a couple of, before everything fell apart. So we do have a full portion of the visual arts. And I think I also mentioned the fact that we are beginning to get significance. Obviously, I mean, you're looking at Nigerian artworks being sold for what? Upwards of 2, 3, 4 million pounds. You understand? We've already talked, we did talk about that. And we did talk about the importance as well of visual arts in Nigeria. I mean, I'll give you an example. Our public spaces. You guys should be beautifying our public spaces. You know, like, you know, the whole artworks across the board, you know, outside beautification and the rest. There's so much that you in the visual arts are able to do in collaboration with the government. But the problem, as always, is, first of all, the path to the market. Path to the market. How many galleries do we have? How many of them are still being sustained? Some people have also created online type platforms to try and sell art. I think, you know, we also talked about, even in the UK, I think it's I'm not sure if it's Sotheby's or who, that had a full African section. It's Sotheby's, right? That had a full African section for visual arts. So do we understand the value of visual arts? Of course, but start thinking about the fact that, can I use an artwork collateral in a bank? Yeah, do you understand what I'm saying? I can't even use an artwork as collateral. There was a piece of art I bought in 2007. I bought it for 100,000 naira. Then I didn't have money, but I managed to squeeze out 100,000 naira to buy it because I loved that painting. It's still in my house till today. I don't think it's worth more than that 100,000 if I go out to go and sell it now, right? You know, how are we able to start looking at even valuation of the artworks? How are we able to start monetizing? What is the path to the money for all these artists that are out there, right? You know, we've talked about residencies, for instance. How do we start generating a bit more activity around art residencies? Whether it's bringing it here or funding people to go for art residencies abroad. You know, you can't, as much as we say we are good artists, we know how to do all this, but it's also a business. Do we even see it as a business? But this is back to what we are talking about, that there was even that, there was this Creative Arts Fund or something. There's some piece of legislation that happened a long time ago where companies were meant to set aside an endowment fund, where companies were meant to set aside part of their money for an arts endowment fund or something. I don't know if that piece of legislation ever went through. But if you now compare endowment funds in the UK and in the US, they are sitting on billions of dollars as art endowment funds that they can actually use to drive the growth of the industry. But if you had a piece of legislation that you put together where companies were meant to contribute something to that, and it never went through, what are we talking about? I still go back to what? Policy, for instance. Or can I get a tax deduction if I fund an art residency? If I decide to fund an art residency, would you give me a tax deduction for that, for instance, as a company? So what is really my incentive to put anything in the visual arts? This is why I said, let's go back to the beginning again and ask those questions. Define the industry. When you define the industry, look at the policy, look at global best practices, see how we can actually marry all of them together within a formalized setting. Meaning that in the individual guilds and associations, you also need to have brought yourselves together so that you're able to now come under a more formalized structure. But when you have 50 different associations, right? I mean, I didn't say, we have freedom of association and everything, but are you able to then bring it all together where people are actually able to now access a benefit that is across board to everybody? Or is it because maybe this association is more powerful than the others, it's their members that get the best? So there's a whole restructuring that needs to happen. So I don't know if with a few words of mine, you know that we actually spent some time on visual arts. We did spend time on visual arts. Thank you.
Sorry.
I don't know how many more, how much more time? I think.
Can I?
Yeah. I mean, you can.
Yes.
I'm still around, you know, maybe I'll take the last two questions and that's it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, or still morning, and all protocols observed. I just want to say thank you for your presentation. My name is Louis Udo. I'm the General Manager licensing at the Musical Copyright Society of Nigeria, MCSN. I've listened to you carefully, and I tend to agree with you that a lot still needs to be done, even with your own study. I've looked at your page 10 of your, what's it called, the pyramid you drew, and I can see that you would still need to do more study. I'll be surprised if your full report is out, because it only shows that it is not complete. You have organizations, if you go through the history, please look at that, not exhaustive. Even at that, I want to say, even at that, you would need to sometimes go into history. I kind of like what the DG of the NCC did when he went up that podium, to give a brief history of where the issue or copyright emanated from. And he said we could trace back to God knows when. We need to do a homework well. Otherwise, you would find, like you said, let us speak freely, you would be robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that is where we need to start. Not exhaustive, but there are people that are important that needs to be on that pyramid. Okay, yes, it needs to be. For instance, MCSN is not on that pyramid and it ought to be there if you're talking about CMOs in Nigeria.
today. Okay, so
to be honest with you,
more work needs to be done.
100%.
Except you tell me you don't know. Yes, sir.
No. I said 100%. I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
So to
no,
sorry, sir.
No, she's saying something. Yes, go ahead. They already have the information. I'm aware of that. They already have the information.
Well,
they know.
PwC?
To plead, I don't know, but
so there are two different studies.
Okay.
Just so you understand, there are two different studies.
Okay.
So there's the Punuka study and the report they'll be talking about, and then there was a PwC study that was last year.
Okay.
So let's first of all, my apologies to anybody that's not here. But if I really was to put everything here, remember I said not exhaustive, and I don't think anyone is more important than the other.
I think I forgive you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very clear.
I forgive you for that.
Please, thank you very much for forgiving me. But to be honest, like I said, it's a collaborative effort, and what we'll just do is the stakeholder mapping. Remember when I was talking about the steps? Part of the steps is the stakeholder mapping. You need to get a clear stakeholder mapping. The last question, there was a last question. Are we done? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sam Ekweme. I'm Ministry of Budget and Planning. Let's say to the Honorable Minister. So I'm not speaking on his behalf, but I just want to say that really my coming here, especially maybe your second or third slide that gave the gamut of the creative industry, which is to say it is not just Nollywood or the audiovisuals, but a whole lot. And, the creative industry is really key. You talked about policy. So I was looking forward to what are the policies that we need to work on in government? What are those low-hanging fruits that will help us get structured as quickly as possible? And who are the key stakeholders that will make this happen? Okay, so I was still looking forward to some unanswered questions.
I thought I mentioned, in fact, I talked about one. I talked about road infrastructure tax. I asked you a question.
But however, the key thing I want to say here is that we have the long-term plan ongoing, and I'm happy that Isoma is here and she's actively involved. And I also call on all the practitioners, both regulators and practitioners, to be very, very interested on that plan, because that's both the medium-term and the long-term perspective plan.
I'm not part of it.
Good, so thanks. So we look forward that most of what we are seeing here, or most of the questions that we need to answer here, if we bring it into that thematic working group, it will help us, the country, in developing the roadmap that will take us to the next level, which is we want to be a very big industry. We're already big, but we wanted to take it bigger, right? So let's actively participate. Let's bring all our ideas to this, because, we are going to draw our plan the first 5 years, the next 10 years, and then to 2050. And that should be a workable plan and not just a wish-wash plan. And so if we're having all these people here participating actively, we should have something that will change that industry for good. So thank you for raising this. And as ministry, we are very interested in this program, not just this, but how to move the creative industry. In fact, it's identified as a big growth sector, right? It's not just the agri and the oil and gas. It is one of the biggest growth sectors. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And I'm really glad to hear that. Even though I'm not glad to hear that I'm not part of this plan or part of the working group. So please take this feedback from me that you did not make us part of the working group. But to be honest, it's really, heartwarming to hear that, we're putting together something that would actually kind of grow this. But I keep saying this, whatever we're going to do, first of all, even the definition and the mapping is critical for me. You know, definition and the mapping is critical. Else, we'll just keep on doing plans and plans without necessarily even understanding what we're planning for. And that for me requires boots on the ground to get this information and actually be able to have something and then we're working with. Else we're planning without the data. That's for me the way I see it. But you know, great comments and I appreciate that. So thank you very much for your time and it's been very engaging. People have asked me very hard questions. I thought I would just come and just breeze through and go. But I've been asked hard questions, but I think it shows the passion and commitment of everybody here. And let's just continue engaging. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chijioke. And thank you everyone for your continued attention. Just to speak quickly to the comments on the thematic working group, I'm sure several people here have been involved in that process. I know Mrs. Uche Walker was involved in answering some questions for the thematic working group. And we have been pushing in the thematic working group for PwC to be involved. And we hope that following from the presentation today, that can become a reality. We are adjusting the program a little bit. I can see that we're all already engaged in the coffee break. So to just save time, we're going to move into the next presentation. I would ask that we remain orderly whilst we are enjoying our lunch break items. So please, we would like to commence the second presentation, please. Okay, so the second presentation for today will be taken by me. Sorry, you've seen so much of my face and voice, but I like to think I'm a very interesting person, so I hope it's not that bad. Today's session from PNUCA would be titled Effective Copyright Framework, a Key to Unlocking the Economic Value of the Nigerian Creative and Cultural Industries. Now, to give some context on how PNUCA got involved in these studies, first of all, PNUCA has a very large and a leading media and entertainment practice. And so we've been very involved from a private sector point of view, dealing with market players and participants and some of their challenges. So I guess it naturally made sense for us to want to be involved in see issues which we have seen our clients struggle with as they carry out their business. And so we were originally engaged to carry out a diagnostic study on the collective management of copyright in Nigeria. Now, just to give a quick explanation, what is collective management? Because I'm sure you've been hearing it. You've been hearing about collective management organizations and collective management, but what exactly is collective management? Well, collective management is a process whereby stakeholders decide to assign their copyrights to a third party, either all or some of those copyrights, for that third party's administration. Usually, you would see them assigning certain rights that are more difficult for them to administer in their private capacity. So for instance, the right of public performance. So if we were listening to any surrounding sound music in this space, that would be considered a communication to the public or a public performance. And it would be difficult for instance, individual record labels or music publishing companies to go to every single hotel, restaurant, bar, and collect the necessary royalties. So over time, they discovered that it was more efficient for them to come together in joint organizations and administer those rights collectively. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about collective management. I'm just putting it in a very layman way. But for the purposes of the presentation today, we are not necessarily speaking exclusively to collective management. We're actually speaking to copyright in general. Because by undertaking a study about collective management, it really makes you, it unfolds the main effect of copyright on economic value of those types of properties. So our conversation today, our presentation today is much wider. So I really love to do very engaging and interactive sessions, and I feel like I'm really losing everyone. So maybe I give like a 2-minute break for everyone to be done with their consumption, and then we take it back. I think that that would be the best way forward. It's better to give a 2-minute break. Okay, I'll give a 2-minute break for everyone to, you know, get through with their coffee and their tea. And sorry for those online, please give us 2 minutes here so that we're more in sync. Thank you. Hello? 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 Sorry, please, we would like to commence the next presentation. Please remember that we have other participants via Zoom, and we really can't keep them waiting for long periods of time. So if we could please settle back down as we commence the second presentation and the second half of today's seminar. Thank you very much. I think I need not continue to introduce myself, and I'll just quickly move into the rest of the presentation. Hello. Thank you, everybody. I hope we've all enjoyed our lunch break. You missed. Okay, so quickly on, because I know that we all have 1,001 things to do, and I don't want to keep us here for such a long time, and we have a lot to get through in this presentation. So for those who don't know, and I'm sure there are several of us who know, because a lot of us here are stakeholders and we are involved in the creative and cultural industries. What exactly is copyright, and what does it have to do with the creative and cultural industries? Copyright is a form of intellectual property which protects literary works, artistic works, cinematograph, film, sound recording, broadcast, a whole slew of works. And I need not repeat this because Mr. Chijioke had sort of given us a breakdown of the different kinds of sectors that are covered under the creative and cultural industry. But essentially, copyright is what grants the participants in those areas the exclusive control over the distribution, publication, reproduction, and adaptation of those works. And when you look at these rights or these actions, the action of distributing, of publicizing, of communicating and adapting, those are all economic rights. So copyright is essentially the vehicle through which people who participate in these areas can make money from their activities, right? That protection that they get allows them to make money from their activities. So it is essentially central to these areas. Copyright is fundamental to deriving economic value from these sectors. And you see, there's a philosophy behind copyright and generally intellectual property. It is a means to allocate resources. The intent of copyright law is to create private rights for authors. When I use the word authors, I know we immediately think about books, but authors actually refers to whoever has created a work that has or is eligible for copyright protection, right? And inventors, because there is an understanding that the continued creation, and you can see it came up in Chijioke's presentation when he talked about these new jobs that are being created by the creations, new creations. You have social media managers. There's a new job that has come up as a result of social media, which somebody created. So there's an understanding behind the philosophy of copyright that it is a way of allocating resources and that there must be a balance between the right of the author to derive economic value from their work and the availability of this creation to the public. It is understood that this creation is of value to the public. And you see, this is critical when we are talking about why an efficient copyright framework is needed to unlock economic value in the sector. Because there must be an understanding by all stakeholders of the real value of copyright and its real importance. Now, just going in, the biggest challenge with copyright is striking a balance between access and incentives. What I mean by striking a balance, copyright has to strike a balance between the author being able to derive economic value from their work and that work being able to be available to the public, because there's an understanding that is important to the public. And from a because a lot of policymakers are here, and I think most of our private sector friends are probably joining via the Zoom, you can see this tension, you know, in how this works. And from a policy making perspective, this is what you're thinking about when you're looking at copyright and you're making decisions and policy decisions around this area. So to ensure public welfare, there must be a balance between the social benefits and cost of providing economic incentives for creation. And how is this achieved? By limiting the duration of copyright, and as we go on, you see that this exists in our present copyright laws. By making exceptions, when we say exceptions, by making exceptions under which that's exclusive rights to the author. Remember that I said an author is, I know we're already thinking about books, but remember that an author is the creator of the work that has copyright protection. So always remember that when I use the word author. And ensuring that copyrights are mandatorily available for licensing in certain circumstances. And I think COVID is a very good example. We all know that the COVID vaccine is, well, some people are saying 97, some people are saying 95, some people are saying 90% ready. But there is a vaccine. And that vaccine, the technology behind that vaccine is protected by what you call patent law, which is a type of intellectual property, not copyright, which is our primary discussion today. And now there's a question. COVID is a worldwide crisis, right? Pfizer or whichever, you know, pharmaceutical company has that intellectual property to the vaccine. So technically, they have the exclusive rights to exploit it, to monetize it. But the wide available, so therefore they can set the price, right? So they can decide that because this vaccine is so important, it's going to be $3,000 per vaccine. But if it is $3,000 per vaccine, does it serve the very important social need that the majority of the population in the world, not just in America or the UK or Italy, wherever it's developed, the majority of the population in the world need to have access to this vaccine? And then the concept which you see in patents, and you also see it in copyright law, of compulsory licensing then comes in, where the government can swoop in and say, because there's an overriding public need for this creation, we can come in and say, this creation must be licensed. It does not mean that the creator will not benefit from it, but it will not be at a point where, as a result of exercising that right, the public need, which is the availability of the vaccine to everybody, is put in jeopardy. I hope you're understanding. I'm giving all these examples for you to understand the importance and the gravity of copyright and intellectual property. When you look at the economy, when you look at issues of public health, and how it goes even beyond. Today we're focusing on the creative and cultural industries, but intellectual property touches on so many industries. And we must create a country and have policies that drive creativity and incentivize creativity, because beyond, you know, revenue that you derive from the economic activity that goes on, creativity can solve real social issues. And when, as policymakers and also as stakeholders, market participants, these tensions must always be considered. So what is the regulatory landscape? I just quickly run through this. What are the laws that are relevant? You have the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, of course, the Nigerian Copyright Act 2004, the Copyright Collective Management Organization Regulation 2007, the Copyright Levy of Materials Order 2012. And then we're also signed to several international treaties, the Berne Convention, the Universal Copyright Convention, trade-related aspects of intellectual property, popularly known as TRIPS, WIPO Copyright Treaty, Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances, which was something that the DG of NCC recently signed. And what are the key regulatory bodies? We would say the Nigerian Copyright Commission is a key regulatory body, but also the Corporate Affairs Commission. And as we go through, you would see why. I've already talked about what rights can be protected. So what is eligible for copyright protection? I've given you very broad discussions about copyright, but how is a work eligible for copyright protection? And this is defined under Section 1 and Section 2 of the Copyright Act. The work must be original. Now, original does not mean that it must have never existed before. That is not the concept of originality when we're looking at copyright. The concept of originality in copyright speaks to the fact that sufficient effort must have been expended on the work that gives it a certain distinctiveness. I don't know if you understand. So it's not that it must be something that never existed before, no. It must be something that when I look at it, I can see the level of effort you've put into it, that it stands out, just putting it under layman terms. Expressed in a fixed medium, and this is a very important point. Copyright does not protect ideas. Copyright protects the implementation of ideas, the expression of ideas. So if the idea is still in your head, but it is not manifested in a fixed format, it does not have protection. The author is a Nigerian citizen or a company domiciled in Nigeria or in a country which is a party to an obligation in a treaty or other international agreements to which Nigeria is a party. This is extremely important when you're looking at things from a policy perspective. I talked earlier about some of the international treaties that we are signed onto in Nigeria, but one of the big challenges to our copyright framework is that we have not adjusted our local laws to give real effect to these treaties that we are signed onto. And what is that doing? A lot of those treaties are things that have come out as a result of research, considering the reality of copyright and all of that. So they're very advanced. And they also give Nigerian authors access to protection in other countries. So we are at risk. And we're talking about right now, we're having shortages of foreign exchange. The price of oil has fallen. And we have an industry in the creative and cultural industry that is exportable and has the ability to derive foreign exchange for the country. The country must prioritize domesticating the international treaties that we are signed onto because of the principle of reciprocity. So as our people are creating, they should be able to export and be covered under international laws that give them protection. And so when we don't domesticate those laws into Nigeria, we are putting our intellectual property, our copyright in our creative and cultural industries at risk. I don't know, am I making sense? Am I being followed? Okay. And the work must first be published in Nigeria. Now, remember that earlier I was talking about the philosophy of intellectual. Why am I off? Okay. What's happening? I was talking earlier about the philosophy of intellectual property protection, and I talked about the tensions between the need for creativity, the fruits or the benefits of creativity to benefit the public good and also the private individual, right? And I talked about how one of the ways to do that is putting a limitation. And so you look at, this is straight from our Copyright Act, and most countries that have copyright laws replicate something similar. So copyright, you don't have it forever, right? In literary works, when I say literary works, I'm talking about books, magazines, things like that. Musical, artistic works, I'm talking about, when I say musical, I'm talking about like sheet music. Sheet music is if you play the piano or any instrument. Sorry, I did music, and I was actually music prefect in GS3, but I don't remember anything from that time. But you know the way they say treble and bass and those things that you read to play the instrument. That sheet music is considered a musical work, and to an extent also can be considered a literary work. It's quite interesting. And an artistic work would be like a painting, for instance. These types of works exist. You have the protection for 70 years during the lifetime of the author, right? And no, 70 years after the end of the life of the author, or in some cases, if you can't narrow down when the author died or really even narrow down who the author is, it's tied to 70 years after it was first published or something like that. But it is not a perpetual right. And it's very important to note this. You can see for cinematograph films, it's 50 years and the rest. This is information that you can find online. It's not that difficult. But this just shows you that our copyright law presently understands those philosophical issues that I've discussed earlier. And already we have some of those things in our copyright law being considered. Now, I'm sure you asked what happens when it expires, right? What happens to it is that it goes into the public domain. And what does that mean? When it's in the public domain, it means that it belongs to everybody and belongs to nobody. And that's where the public can have access to it. So I always give the example that people never really think, why does Disney always redo Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast? Like they're always doing new versions of all those things all the time. It's actually a way to continue to extend the copyright protection on those works. Because for every new one they create, that then has, and it's very interesting. It's a strategy because they understand that this is important. These things are folklores. Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast is no different from Tales by Moonlight, The Tortoise and this. We have those same things, but what have we done with it? What are we doing with it? So I've talked about economic rights and moral rights. I don't need to go into this again. So let's talk about infringement, because if you hark back to Chijioke's presentation, he talked about one of the biggest challenges to the creative and cultural industries being low enforcement, or to an extent lack of enforcement of copyright laws. And what that essentially means is, and he talked about piracy and things like that, and that's all a form of copyright, that's all a form of infringement. So what does it mean when your work is infringed? Copyright is infringed when a person uses the work of another person without a license or authorization. So I don't necessarily permit you to do something with my work. I've created this work, this work that has copyright protection, and you have infringed. I forgot to mention earlier that under Nigerian law, copyright is automatic. So what that means is I don't need to register it for me to have the protection. In other types of intellectual property like trademark, patents, remember when I was giving the example of COVID, you need to register those things to have that protection. But for copyright is automatic. But in my private practice, I always advise people to go to the copyright registry and do what they call a notification, which is kind of a registration, but is more like putting the public on notice that you are the one that has created this work. And then your work, you're registered in the copyright register. So I can go to that register and I can see that you are the owner of this work. Even if you don't do that, you still have protection. But I just think from a business perspective, it's just tidier. And I always advise people to do that. And if you look at a country like the US, if you wanted to take out an infringement action, there's actually a mandation that you should have gone and notified your work for you to be able to take out an infringement action, which to me, again, shows that these are, the way they are making their laws, they're thinking, right? They want people who are in this business to be more structured, more formalized. So they're saying, well, if you want to go to court and seek recourse that someone has encroached, you should have notified the public that you are the owner of the work. Their law still grants copyright automatically to an extent, but when you want to enforce that right, it requires that you should have registered that you own that right, because they understand that that is a more structured way of doing things. So I'm giving these examples because we have a lot of policymakers here, and I want us to have philosophical ideas around copyright, which is core when you're looking at the creative and cultural industries, as we are working towards, bringing out the economic value of these sectors. So I can run through the whole list of how you infringe. I talked about the basic 4 things you can do when you are the owner of a copyright. You can distribute, you can publicize, you can adapt. So, this is just a whole list, which is as stated in the Copyright Act. But if you do any of these things and you have not been given an authorization, then you have infringed. And there are 2 ways that you can be authorized. You can be given a license. A license is more like limited. It's like, I'm giving you, I still own it, but I'm giving you the permission to either do all these things or 1, 2, 3, 4 of these things, right? Or an assignment, which is, I'm actually taking all my rights and I'm giving it to you. like as if you are now the owner, and you can do with it as I could deal with it. But the Nigerian law, and I always tell people that a lot of people like to say that everything in Nigeria is bad. But our copyright law, despite the fact that it's overdue for an update, and you will see that as we go in the slide, the way it is, there's still some decent protection. And actually, the biggest issue we have is implementation of the laws that we actually have. So Nigerian copyright law says if you want to assign, it must be written. Again, understanding that for you to give what you have fully to somebody, there should be some structure behind it, and it should be a written document. And then the law also withholds one of the rights. I'll go back. You look at this chart. I'm saying I broke down there's copyright, then you have your economic rights. Your economic rights are how we make money. Your moral rights originate from the understanding of copyright that that creation is personal to you as the author. And so you have a right of attribution and integrity. What does that mean? That even if I assign or license that right, that creation should be attributed to me. So I wrote this book. Even if I gave it to HEBN publishers to publish it, they must write written by Isioma Idibe. Is this clear? So under Nigerian law, this right really cannot be assigned. So even if I give somebody all of my economic rights, if I feel that they have done something with my work that is fundamentally against my person or takes away from the spirit of the work, and I'll give you a very controversial example. I'm a pastor in a church, and I've written a children's book, superhero children's book. And a company buys, I assign my rights to a company for them to make a film based on this, my children's book. And they decide, as in the modern trend that we have now, that the superhero is going to be a lesbian. And so the people in my church will say, are you saying that you are condoning homosexuality? After all, you're the one that wrote the book. I can actually, as a pastor, say I revoke my rights because what you are doing with my work goes against my moral rights, goes against my what? Integrity, and goes against my person. And so therefore, I cannot allow you to do that adaptation, despite the fact that I had given you those rights. So what does it show? That the law understands that, yes, there's an economic imperative with this, but there's also something very personal about creation, and that must also be protected. So what am I saying with this example? That our policies, yes, even though they are targeted towards how do we get economic value from this sector, they must never forget that this area is actually still something that people do from a deep personal perspective. So when we are putting regulations out there, we cannot do things that stifle that creativity, right? And I'll use an example, and I know it will be controversial, but in the film industry, there is a terrible MOPICOM bill that they've been pushing, Motion Pictures Practitioners Act of Nigeria or something like that, which is intended to regulate film practitioners and has language like, if you make a film, but you are not registered, you can be fined or even imprisoned. I mean, this sounds like something you see in communist China, not something you see in a democracy. Because filmmaking is like, the beauty of filmmaking is that a boy in Shomolu can decide that I want to capture what is going on in my community and make a film. And he puts the film out there. He doesn't know, how it will impact. So if he must be registered first before he can do that, we're going to lose a lot of creative people. Because, and Chidoke alluded to it in his presentation, creativity, what we even have in Nigeria is low skills but high creativity. And that is what has saved us. That is what has even gotten us to the point where we have a cultural and creative industry to even talk about. So if we stifle all those people who just pop up, who just create and pop up by creating policies that put too many barriers to entry, let me put it like that, then we've already killed the industry before you started. So this is something that must be seriously contemplated when we're looking at policing the industry, if that's even a proper word. So what are the exceptions to copyright infringement? Fair dealing. What is fair dealing? Fair dealing is a concept that, pardon? Fair dealing is a concept in copyright that says that you can use snippets or bits of someone's work, reasonably, right? As long as you attribute that to the person whose work you've used. So like when you're writing like your school report, for instance, and you are taking extracts from different people and all of that, and you put it in your footnote, you reference, that's considered fair dealing. Now, I think that there's a problem with our fair dealing language under Nigerian law because it is too broad. It's so broad that somebody can write a newspaper article and like essentially take someone's whole work and just plaster it there and say, oh, I've attributed you because I said your name. But the question is, what is the line between plagiarizing completely and attribution? And you see in other copyright laws, like in Canada, for instance, they give very specific parameters around what is considered fair dealing. So they'll say you have to use only a certain number of words or a certain percentage. And if you go beyond that percentage, you have infringed. And when we were looking at collective management, the literary work sector has really suffered from this fair dealing a lot. So one of the collective management organization for the literary work sector is called RIPRONIG, Reproductive Rights Organization of Nigeria. And one of the ways they're supposed to be able to collect licenses is to license universities, which you have in other countries. So you license the universities because in universities, there's a lot of, copying. There's a lot of, oh, we will photocopy the book, and do all of that. So they license universities. But Nigerian universities can come under the fair dealing exception because actually use for academic reasons is considered an exception to copyright law. But in other countries, it says you can do the fair dealing, but it must be a certain percentage. And if it crosses that percentage, then you are infringing, which means you have to pay. Do you understand? So our literary work sector is literally dying because the fair dealing language in our Copyright Act is too broad. And these are some of the things that need to change. We need to put some more parameters around it. So you can see here, what is fair dealing exception? Research. So that's where universities benefit. Private use, if I'm watching it in my house. Criticism and review. So this is where the journalists just thrive. You understand? Current events and all that kind of stuff. Parody, like if somebody is making a joke of something and all that. So you can see what I'm saying, that it's so broad, the fair dealing, that there are so many ways in which people can abuse this. And this is a major leakage in our copyright structure that we need to block. And our literary work sector is really, really bleeding and suffering from this. So if someone infringes, what are your remedies? Under Nigerian law, you have civil and criminal remedies, which is fantastic. A civil remedy is you go to the Federal High Court and you institute a civil suit. You ask for damages, injunction, order to account. And order to account is to say, how much have you made from this thing, from your use? Then you give me what the court will have the discretion to say, this is how much you should get. And then there's criminal. There's criminal actions which the court can impose payment of fines or terms of imprisonment. But one of the challenges with this, which should really be a deterrent, is that under our current Copyright Act, the penalties are too low. People from NCC are here. I think the fine is like, is it up to 10,000 if you are caught with, is it up to 10? Under the current Copyright Act. 10,000 per copy, total. Depends, but would you say that is strong enough under the current act? Yeah. Sorry, the way I do present, I hate like the sound of my voice, so I'm already tired. So I have to give the microphone to somebody else to talk.
Isioma, it depends on the nature of the offense. For the primary infringement, like reproduction, it will be 1,000 naira per copy. Now, sometimes people think this is very low, but when you look at somebody who has a warehouse load of pirated books, let's say 1,000 books times 1,000, then you begin to appreciate the severity of that fine. But that's not to take away from the fact that this law has spent about 30 years now, or 31 years. And absolutely, some of those provisions are beginning to be obsolete and needs review. So, which is why we did the reform some years ago. And we're looking at penal provisions that will not have limit, upper limit. Yes. It gives the judges discretion to more or less look at the circumstances of the offense and probably sentence accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm glad these are the people that do the enforcement every day. And if the judge is limited to saying 1,000 per copy, okay, 1,000 copies, that's great. But most of these guys have already made millions already from the infringement. That for them is like, you know how drug dealers, I don't know, okay, maybe it's a young people thing, but some of us like watching all these shows about drug dealers in South America. Because I actually think that they teach you a lot about business, ironically. And so the drug dealers sometimes they'll say, we're okay to lose this shipment. Maybe the shipment is worth $10 million because we have a shipment of $100 million that we've gotten into America. That is exactly what's happening because the law does not give the judges discretion to really bring down the ladder of the law on those penalties. So and I know that the new copyright bill is targeting some of these issues to disincentivize people from infringing because the consequences will be heavier. Okay, so I went too far. All right, so let's talk about, this was the core of our study, collective management of copyright. And there was something that Mr. Pascal said in his introduction, I don't know if a lot of people picked it, and talked about one of the reasons why AFD had sponsored this study into collective management is that collective management of copyright is actually, somehow there's a disconnect between what I'm clicking here and what's showing on the slide. So down. Collective management is a very stable source of income for the sector because it's ongoing. It's basically like for life, right? I'm a musician, I make a song 20 years ago. I can continue to generate revenue from that song if people are playing it everywhere in the world and my collective management organization is working the way it should and they collect and they remit to me, that kind of stuff. It's a very stable source of income for creatives. I'm using music as an example, but you have it in film. Like people on, like for instance, some of these shows like Friends, everybody knows Friends, everybody knows Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And you always wonder, like, why are all these actors so wealthy? I mean, maybe they've not even done let's not even say wealthy, but they're not hungry. Not like what we see in Nigeria, that an actor gets sick and they will start doing social media posts that, you know, they need someone to pay for them. You wonder why all those guys in Friends, they're okay. You know, they're not so rich, maybe except Jennifer Aniston because she subsequently became a movie star. But the rest of them seem okay. Why? A lot of them have royalties that they earn from every time that an episode of that show is played, they earn a royalty on it. And you know that anywhere you go in the world, including Nigeria, there are always reruns of Friends on TV. There are just some shows like that, Friends, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that classics, and they're always playing reruns, right? So let's say, just rough maths, it's being played somewhere. Exactly. And if each actor is earning about 0.05%, which that's not what they're earning, off of whatever they're generating, and just do the guest artist, Justin Bieber. We have a very soon, what did the UK say? The UK said that 2030, they're not going to be fossil fuel cars in the UK anymore. Oil is going. But this even doing better and normal, maybe some people choosing not to. And the recession challenges of them, like the violation of
there are ways
but there are ways in which CMOs can still deduce usage. But from our findings, distribution of royalties were not according to usage. Most of the CMOs were distributing generally. So it's like, we'll just say this is what we're distributing to all the members and all the members get X, which is not fair. Remember, copyright is an economic thing. So if Wizkid is generating the licensing, that people are really listening to Wizkid, Wizkid cannot be getting the same thing as Face? You know what I mean? And we didn't see this in a lot of the work with the CMOs. So a lot of work needs to be done here. Now, CMOs cited technical limitations in doing that. Also cited issues with users' unwillingness to pay as well, and things like that. But I still think, and we still think, and you see it in our study, that better distribution of royalties could be done, even with the limitations of technology that exist. There was difficulty for smaller CMOs like AVRS and Repronic. So AVRS is the Audiovisual Rights Society, which is more for the film industry. And like I said, Repronic is for literary works, to enforce licensing against users. Remember when I talked about how the fair dealing regulation is too broad? So you can understand why they're having some issues with users. And AVRS has a very peculiar problem. AVRS is very inhibited by contracts. So I'll put it like this. Remember when we talked about copyright, you can license or assign. AVRS would represent something like an actor who would go and sign a deal and say, I assign all my rights to the producer. That erodes AVRS being able to collect royalties for that actor because they don't have that right to grant to AVRS in the first place. So this is a big challenge for AVRS. And we're recommending that in the new copyright bill, you can create some adjustments to the law that prevent certain rights from being assigned by certain groups that you want to be enjoying income from collective management organizations. Complications arising with licensing users in musical works due to the multiple CMOs which represent rights holders. Mr. Luis is here from MCSN. Thank you so much. In the music space, we have MCSN, Musical Society of Nigeria, and COSON, Copyright Society of Nigeria. And they both represent the same rights, musical works and sound recordings. And there are a lot of issues arising from this overlap. Both organizations contend, that they are representing sometimes the same works. So it's very confusing for users. What is this? Did I touch something? Okay. So there's overlap on who they are representing, and this is very confusing to users. And then users are not clear who to pay, right? If I pay MCSN, COSON will write me tomorrow and say, you are owing me. You're supposed to have paid a license. So users are confused. Who do we give money to? And then the whole sector loses out because users would rather not pay. I use that as an excuse to not pay. So this overlap here needs to be resolved. And if you look at our study, we address this issue and give some suggestions as to what can be done to do that. The Nigerian Copyright Commission needs to consider either the copyright law is adjusted to break down the rights. So for instance, it will be written in such a way that you can't have two organizations representing the same rights. So for instance, MCSN can be focused only on musical works and COSON is focused only on sound recordings. And maybe that might make things easier. Or NCC forces these two organizations to collaborate. And what does collaboration look like? Joint licensing and tariffing. So maybe there might be a need to establish an independent third-party body that would that would license users. So users can't use this excuse of, I don't know who to pay. They would license users and then remit the money to the CMOs, and the CMOs will figure out how they are going to pay their members. That's an option. So if you look at, I don't know what page, Ugo, what page in our study do we give all those? Because I don't want to bore you with all these more technical things. But this is not an unsolvable problem. The stakeholders and NCC have to decide how they are going to solve. And we've given some suggestions and also give examples of what they do in other countries, right? So in a country, I always like using Canada, it's terrible, but it's just a very good example for me. So, but like in Canada, the rights are broken down a lot. And so it makes it difficult for this kind of situations to arise. And we gave those examples. Frequent intra and inter-organizational conflicts among the CMOs. The CMOs are in all kinds of lawsuits between themselves and also themselves and their regulator. A lot of lawsuits. We actually tried to do a search. We couldn't even get to all the courts, but just the courts we got to a lot. I think we saw about 20 cases that involved the CMOs. Now, you say, why is this important? It's important for multiple things. Remember that we have a challenge, a complication with some of the CMOs having overriding rights. And collaboration is an option. But how can they collaborate if they're fighting each other? It makes the job of the regulator more difficult if they are fighting the regulator in court. And also, resources that should go to the authors, their money is being spent paying for copious legal fees. This is inefficient and has to be resolved. And so one of the recommendations we made is that maybe the law has to change to prioritize alternative dispute resolution as a way to resolve disputes in the industry. Because even in my experience in private practice, what I have found is that our judicial system doesn't quite understand intellectual property and certainly does not even understand our space. Our judicial system is generally slow. This is a problem with judicial systems in the world. In Nigeria, it is particularly slow. And so the industry ends up suffering because there are very critical issues that are essentially stuck in court. Also, all these constant litigations have weakened the power of the NCC over time. Certain decisions that have been made have weakened the power of the NCC to stand as a regulator, which we even made suggestions that those things can be changed, can be resolved or rectified rather by some legislative changes through the copyright bill. So you see, I keep talking about the copyright bill. I'm saying that our copyright law is due for an update because so many things have happened since that law was written and we need to address them. The mode of consumption of content has changed from analog to digital. Our law needs to take that into consideration. So there are so many things, a lot of things are riding on this law change. A lot of things are riding on this law change. Lack of adequate manpower. We saw that some CMOs had like 1 or 2 staff. I mean, you're dealing with hundreds, thousands of works. The most efficient CMO from our study was COSON. And there was a direct relation with manpower and revenue. Of the 1.1 billion, 1 billion was generated by COSON alone. And COSON has the most manpower and is the most structured. So you can see there's a direct correlation between having adequate manpower and structuring and being able to deliver on results. So this is a big, big, big issue that needs to be filled. Ambiguity as to rights exercised by the CMOs and those exercised by the rights holders is a big issue. Now, in the beginning, I talked about how in other climes, what CMOs really do is to help rights holders collect those rights that is too inefficient for them to collect in their individual capacity. But what we have in Nigeria is that some CMOs are collecting for everything. So some CMOs are collecting what in music you call synchronization rights. Synchronization is when I put my music in your film, right? I synchronize your music to moving images. That's supposed to be like a B2B traditionally anyways. It's a B2B transaction. You're a producer, you come to me, I'm the owner of the music, I do the deal. But there are some CMOs that are doing these types of deals for their rights holders. Now, there's an argument that before those CMOs started doing that, nobody was doing it. So is it necessarily a bad thing? I think that's a valid argument. But the question is that sustainable long term? Because at the end of the day, for the rights owner, that would have been direct income. But when that income goes into the coffers of the CMO, it is now mixed in with everybody else's money, and then maybe what I would have earned from that versus what I would eventually get where the money is distributed, does it correlate? So these are some of the issues that we need to resolve. So, yeah. Oh, good. I'm at the end. I know you're tired of my voice because I'm tired of my voice too. So, just let's summarize what the challenges to an effective copyright management system in Nigeria is. We've been talking about them since we've been going, but let's summarize them. There are clearly regulatory challenges. We have issues with our collective management system. And we have issues with dispute resolution. We've talked about this. The delay in the passage of the Copyright Bill 2015 is quite literally stifling the industry. I can confidently stay here that if we want an effective copyright framework for this country, for the CCI industries, we must update our copyright bill, our copyright law, sorry. So the fact that our copyright bill has not been passed to date is literally stifling this sector. And the reason why is that the last version that I have seen, because I know that it's changed a little bit from the last one that was publicly made available, is that even from that one, certain inadequacies in the Copyright Act are already dealt with. Issues of digital age are dealt with, right? But it's also important to point out that the bill still has gaps. Again, remember, this is the version I'm talking about is the last publicly available version, and I'm aware that it has still gone through changes, it hasn't been represented to the public. But from the last one we've seen, the bill still has gaps regarding restraining the application of fair dealing was not addressed. Explicitly establishing music publishing, strengthening the NCC, because NCC has subsequently been weakened by series of law cases and a whole slew of other things. But if it goes into the National Assembly, there will be a public hearing and these things can be added, but we need to get that process going. As the representative from the Ministry of Budget and Planning said, I'm involved in the thematic working group. And even for our medium-term development plan, we have put that the copyright bill must be passed by the first quarter of 2021. That is the first thing of our medium-term development plan. That is the next 5 years. This bill must be passed because we understand that it is a ground norm. It is fundamental. We cannot talk all the things we've been talking about, all the gaps we've been identifying can be fixed by updating the bill, and that needs to be done. Inadequacy of resources available to the NCC for enforcement of laws and regulation. Now remember that one of the things I said is, although our bill is overdue for an update, even the way it is now, if it was adequately implemented, we can work with it. But the NCC does not have the adequate resources to enforce it. And that brings us to the second point, the non-implementation of the copyright levy. If you remember when I listed out all the laws that apply, there was the Copyright Levy Materials Order 2012. So we've had this order since 2012. While in 2020, it has never been implemented. What is the Copyright Levy Order? The Copyright Levy Order is what we refer to as private copying. It means that there is a charge, like a tax, on all materials imported and created in Nigeria that have the capacity to reproduce copyright. A friend of mine who is an accountant did a rough estimation using, how many of such materials are imported into Nigeria. And what he was estimating, and I challenge PwC to follow through on this, you know, I've told you, is that we could be earning about 30 billion per annum if we actually activate this levy order. And the way it is written, 30% of that money goes to the NCC. 10% of the 30% is supposed to be used for administrative purposes, and another 10% is supposed to be used for anti-piracy activities. So we're not even asking the government to increase the budgetary allocation for the NCC. Oh, just activate the copyright levy. The industry is able to generate the income for NCC to work. And if you look at all the regulatory agencies in Nigeria that work, like your other NCC, ironic, communications is able to work because it's funded on its own. The stakeholders are able to fund it through licenses and all of that. It does not necessarily need a budgetary allocation to function. So this is such an important thing, because when you have a strong regulator and you have a strong copyright law, that's the foundation of an effective copyright system that can unlock the economic value of the creative and cultural industries in Nigeria. Now, other issues which we've talked about, little understanding of or compliance with regulatory standards by users. Frankly, I like to term this as the Nigerian problem. It's the same reason why you'll be standing in a supermarket and somebody will see that there's a line and they will jump to the front. The general indiscipline in Nigeria and the unwillingness for people to do the right thing affects the industry as much as it affects every other thing in Nigeria. And this can only be solved, again, by proper enforcement of laws and regulations. If people know that there are consequences for their actions, they will straighten up and do the right thing. And there is distrust and allegations of favorism and conflict of interest against the NCC by CMOs. I know the NCC does not like that I'm saying this, but it is the truth. The NCC has to fix its relationship with its stakeholders. NCC has to fix the relationship with the stakeholders, and I know that the NCC is trying. I know that the NCC continues to try to engage. I think what we're simply saying is maybe it is a change of strategy that is needed, but this has come out very strongly in our research, and we think that resolving this issue would help in creating an effective copyright system. There needs to be more trust. NCC suffers from what the government in general suffers from. The people don't trust their government. But I think that the onus is on the government to get the people to trust them. And I was actually at a lunch yesterday, and someone said something, it's so funny I'm using it now, but they said, you can't be selling a product and you're not marketing well. You have to market the product that you are selling. Basically, you can have a bad product, and if you market it well, it can work. But if you are not marketing it at all, it will never move in the market. And I think that antidote is a way to look at this issue, you know, and see how we can resolve it. I don't think I need to talk more about all these. Yeah, actually, I want to talk about this. There is something in our copyright law that is a dispute resolution panel, which is an alternative dispute resolution mechanism, but it is not used. In fact, in our research, we saw that it was only used once for a licensing dispute, which I think was between CoStone and StarTimes, once. This dispute resolution panel needs to be used more, and I'll tell you why. I talked about the judicial system not necessarily understanding how IP works. If this dispute resolution panel, even the way the language is written in the law as to how it should be constituted, talks about having experts in copyright being the ones that sit on this panel, which means that if we are adjudicating most of our disputes through this panel, it is more likely that we will get better decisions and faster decisions. So we need to find a way to get this panel to become a central dispute resolution mechanism for the sector, because resolving disputes timely is key. And I always use the example of a case I was involved in, Okafor's Law. It took us 2 years to get a decision at the court of first instance. By that time, the film had been released, they had made their money, and we're still going to appeal. The question is now, okay, we go through everything, Supreme Court and all of that. Maybe eventually we might get a decision in favor of our client. But a part of that harm can never be rectified, which is the fact that my clients can never make that again. The only thing that they can get is damages for that, but they can never make that film again. And these are some of the realities of how our own disputes work. If it is not dealt with timely, the issue just, by the time the solution comes, it's too late. Whatever you're doing is like medicine after death. So these are some of the issues. We need to get our judges to understand the copyright system. This is a big issue. Because maybe not all disputes can go through an ADR system. But if they have to go through the court system, we need to have judges that understand how this works. And do we consider specialized courts as a way? Some jurisdictions have options like this. So this issue of dispute resolution is critical because disputes are good. Yesterday, somebody told me that if you don't have issues, you will not live. I used the example of how Nigeria actually exports cod fish, and a lot of people don't know. And when we used to first export the cod fish, the fish always used to die on the way. They couldn't figure out why the fish died. So somebody said, throw in 2 or 3 tilapia with the cod fish. They will survive. And it worked. And you know why it worked? The tilapia tried to eat the cod. So the cod kept on fighting. And in that fight for survival, they won. And I thought that was a very good illustration of how disputes, issues are fine. It's normal. Disputes give us jurisprudence. They solve problems even sometimes before they become big problems. But the question is, we have to make sure that there's an efficient and fast way in which that is done, so it is not damaging or permanently damaging. So to summarize our recommendations, we are recommending that the copyright bill should be passed without further delay, that the copyright levy order should be implemented, that the NCC should intensify user orientation, that everyone, the CMOs and stakeholders, need to adhere to corporate governance principles, and that the NCC should partner with other regulators like CAC to help to ensure this. There should be regular supervised audits of CMOs' finances and operations. And NCC will say, yes, they're supposed to make findings, but I think it needs to be a little bit more frequent than what we currently have. More, how will I put it? Right now, NCC gets involved when the issue has escalated. What we're saying is NCC should be involved before it gets too bad. There should be amendments to the Copyright Act that delineate the structure of rights which can be transacted directly with right owners from those attributed to CMOs, and regulations should be amended to make litigation a last resort. Disputes should be referred to the NCC Dispute Resolution Panel, and NCC must strive to build trust with stakeholders. So thank you so much. I know it has been a long presentation. I hope it has been fairly enjoyable, and I leave it open now to questions.
Hello. Thank you so much, Isioma. All protocols observed once again. My name is Louis B. Udo of the Musical Copyright Society, Nigeria. I also want to thank the AFD for putting this together. I have listened to the summary of the report or the study, and I would just like from the MCSN side to make some few comments. Apologies from my chairman, Mr. Oris Wiliki, and the CEO of MCSN, Mr. Mayo Ailaron, who would have loved to be present at this event, but for the fact that the invitation was received late, while both of them have been scheduled for other very important assignments. However, I have been given the responsibility to make the initial reaction of MCSN to the summary report on the diagnostic study on governance and operations of CMOs in Nigeria, known here. Even though a comprehensive reaction will be made formally later. Going through the summary report, we established that the diagnostic study which produced the report relied on the International Federation of Reproduction Rights Organization, IFRO, based in Norway, and model of collective management to adjudge Nigerian CMOs with some references to South Africa. We can say authoritatively, rather than these models, Nigerian
Mr.
CMOs...
Louis, sorry, this is not a question. No, you are supposed to ask a question. If you want to make a comment about the study, you can write to us and make your comment, but this is a question,
Okay.
and that's not a question.
Okay, then I would go to deal straight with the things that you had mentioned. You had talked about the CMO space or the copyright space in Nigeria being able to raise or collect 1.1 billion in how many years? You said 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. But I would say here, even as I stand, that that is not the true position of the space of the CMO. Because in 2017 alone, if I'm not mistaken, MCSN got a court award of 5.9 billion. It's to help us see how big it is, okay? You know, I always just like you would crack those jokes and say, oh, this is what somebody said. For me, it's just like my friend sitting down in Canada, Chidi, and would think he knows everything. If you're not on ground, there is no way that you'll be able to get
Mr.
the
Louis,
grasp.
if you recall when we were giving the study, we had asked all the CMOs to provide us a lot of information. MCSN was very cooperative with that.
Thank you so much.
No, wait. But because that's a question, so I'm going to answer it. Then you can ask your second
I
question.
need to put another question so you can
No,
take
Mr.
the
Because
two.
like, I won't be able to
Take the
recognize,
two.
I won't be able to take two questions at once. So let me
Okay,
answer
I'll
one
ask-
and then you ask your next question. Now, for the purposes, and if you remember, we said this is not an exhaustive number. This is only the number that we can confirm as hard cash that was received. You have a judgment. Has the judgment been paid?
You want me to answer that?
Yes. Has the judgment been paid?
It has gone to the Court of Appeal.
Yes,
now
so it
to the
has not
Supreme
been
Court.
paid.
It has
So
not
when
been
we're
paid.
estimating how much it has generated, we can't put in those numbers that have not been paid. We got our numbers from NCC filings made by the CMOs, and from those NCC filings, that was the number that we were able to deduce. So
Thank you very
I'm
much.
just trying to explain that.
I
I'm not assuming that this is the totality. It's more indicative than
Thank you.
anything, you know?
Okay.
If we were doing a forensic, maybe that would have given us more
Absolutely.
detail.
Now that you went to the forensic, I would like us to also get this picture clear. You have said it that MCSN cooperated in this study, okay? COSON, as you and I know, did not submit themselves to this study. But a situation in this report where it is talking all about COSON, even as you stood there today, what you have told us and all that is about COSON, which never submitted to the study. We find this, we'll find this really alarming, that an organization that did not submit to the study is being talked about more than those that submitted to this study. That is a problem. It means we need to go back to this study. Like I said, we are going to still look at this, but MCSN actually rejects this study for
Okay.
these reasons.
Mr. Luis, it's actually sad
Yes.
that what always happens in the creative and cultural industries is happening again. Which is that
I wouldn't say so.
So
If
let me finish.
study,
Let me finish.
If we have a study, I got up to talk. I'm still on my feet.
Mr. Luis. You have a situation where things become politicized when they need not be politicized. If you had read this study extensively, you would see that all the CMOs were talked about extensively. Now I'm giving a presentation. I'm using all kinds of illustration in my presentation. And the truth of the matter, whether anyone wants to accept it or not, and you can go and do a contrary study, you are at liberty to do that, is that of the figures that we could relatively verify, and I told you where we got those figures from, NCC filings. A diagnostic is not limited to only those who participate. A diagnostic is an analysis of the entire sector, which includes those who participate or do not participate. If MCSN wanted us to bring out a report that was favorable to them, that would mean that we were not doing our jobs well.
I think you got that.
But we have done our jobs, and this is the result. You have every right to not agree with it, but to use words like you reject it, yes, because when I'm giving a presentation, I gave an illustration with one other CMO, when if you read our report, all the CMOs were talked about, I'm not sure that that is necessarily a professional attitude to take towards this. Okay. And I don't think that that's a fair analysis of the report.
Let me say this. I have only responded to your summary because from the way it looks, you have a full report which I have not seen. And if that is shared with us, then you will be able to get maybe our own reaction to it. This is exactly what I'm saying. If there are things that people need to know, that's why I'm on ground here, I need to point that out so that you can probably go back and amend your reports to capture the situation that is actually in the country.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes.
Yes, please. Can someone get the mic over to her? The lady in the pink and gray.
All protocols duly observed. My name is Titi Lola Mafe from National Library of Nigeria. Mrs. Tisioma, I want to appreciate you for that expository presentation. But I have a little reservations too, because I didn't hear the library being mentioned in everything that is happening here.
Who, sorry?
The National Library. I'm from the National Library of Nigeria.
Okay.
And I actually acknowledge that in your presentation, there was a place you mentioned that there are still gaps that are yet to be filled. So I want to assume that the library probably might be one of those gaps that are not yet filled. The library is supposed to be a custodian of our cultural heritage, so to say. And our work largely depends on the copyright rules and regulation of the country, sort of. We have a paradigm shift now from the traditional method to the modern technology, which is bringing about digitization and preservation and also conservation of most of these intellectual properties that we are talking about. We particularly have a problem in the library. That is why we are here today. And we have reached out to the Copyright Commission as well, concerning the extent to which we can digitize and preserve these cultural heritages or intellectual properties that we are discussing about. So I would like you, it's rather not a kind of question or sort of, I don't know, a contribution or something, to mention the place of the library now in everything we are discussing. I also acknowledge your mentioning of collaboration and partnership. So I think that we and the copyright and other stakeholders could collaborate also, you know, so that we can come in terms, because there's no how you can take away the library out of everything we are doing here today. Thank you. I have my other colleagues here who might have to. say something.
There's a lady in a white shirt that had her hand up.
Good afternoon. My name is Uche Uguru. I'm from the Society of Nigerian Artists. Mine is a question. You had mentioned it earlier, but I think I need more light shed on it because I'm here because I watched, also to know more about copyright, I watched a video of an artist. He had his artwork painted, and a lady came into the exhibition hall, brought out the painting, and then she tore it. And it was like she was angry that the guy painted her picture. And as you mentioned, the copyright from different countries is different, because sometimes you see two pieces that look alike and then they will have like different copyrights, and you see it's kind of crazy. So I want to ask, what makes a work original? Like, what makes a product, or what makes it original? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the question from the lady from National Library. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I agree with your comments. I would say that I would consider the library falling under literary works, and to an extent, because of the content, I can see where you're talking about folklores and things like that being under your purview. I think the National Library has a very important role to play when it comes to intellectual property in terms of archiving and being a resource that people can reach out to. And I think that National Library thinking very seriously about digitalizing is a step in the right direction. I think the NCC, I'm sure, is open to collaborating with the National Library on that. So I agree with your summation. I pretty much don't have much to add to that, aside saying that as literary works, you have protection under the copyright law, which, and I don't know whether your books are registered at the NCC, for instance. They must be. And I guess this is for NCC, this is for the National Library and NCC to have those conversations. But yes, your comments are well taken. And then for the question about what is considered originality, I actually picked out several things from what you said. One of the things you had stated without realizing is the issue of image rights versus copyrights. And one of the gaps in our copyright law is that we don't actually have image rights. So what's an image right? Is my right to all of this, right? If someone used my picture or painted my image, I should have protection over that. Now, we don't have image rights specifically written into our copyright law, but we do have jurisprudence that have established image rights. I think there's a Wema Bank case, Federal High Court against Wema, a model against Wema Bank, and she won. I don't know if the case is on appeal, but that established image rights, because I think Wema Bank had used her image without her permission, and she had taken action in court, and she was awarded. There's currently a case between RMD and Jumia that is ongoing as well, very similar. So jurisprudence is trying to fill up the laguna of that. But what a lot of people do is rely on your constitutional right of privacy as a basis to try and invoke image rights. So the question is, did the woman have the right to tear the picture because somebody used her image without her permission? I would say legally, not necessarily. That's even almost assault, because if she had a problem with it, she should have, used a judicial recourse. And when I talked about originality, I said original doesn't mean brand new, as in never seen before. Originality is more about the effort that you have put into the work that makes it, even using the word distinct, I don't even think is the right word, but just makes it stand out, that someone can see that you've put in enough effort into this thing and you have created it. So even if I do a painting of this swan water, which can potentially be somebody's IP, by the way, the shape and design, but I do a painting of this, I would argue that the painting is original, because the whole process of painting and creating that is a whole process, and I've created an entirely new type of copyright, which is the painting of the water. So I don't know if that's a good way to explain it. Is I won't say it's complicated, but is yeah, it's a bit subjective. Yes, please. Ugo. So the man with the heart at the back, then the man in the blue here, and then Chijioke, and the man with the brown shoes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chief Eji Onuzurike. I represent the president of Association of Nigerian Authors. I like what I heard, and I think writers in Nigeria need most of the things that you said. I'm only afraid of the fees we can pay to you. Otherwise, I would have invited you to our national convention in Ilorin, December this year. But all the same, thank you so much. I'll take the message home.
Thank you. There was someone in blue. Ugo, here, right here in front here. The man with the blue. Yes. Please, I would like to recognize the chairman of AVRS, Mr. Mahmoud Ali Balogun, who is joining us virtually, and to also let those who are online to please use the Q&A section to ask their questions. We are reading the questions and we'll answer them in due time. Thank you.
My DG permit me to stand on the existing protocols. My name is Ali Mohammed Awal from the Trademark Office. My question is in tripartite form. It is in form of a comment, especially talking from the side of the public, from the side of the government that has a duty to render service to both you and the CCI. From the previous presentations, the presenter was making a statement that why don't we securitize our property to get loan? So I would like to start by saying, why shouldn't you do it? You see, you did a very good job by creating a source base for policy and strategic review. And what I noticed in your work is that you try to draw inspiration from other jurisdictions, especially in terms of the monetary aspect of what creativity can generate and contribute to the treasury. I don't know how much time you have spared to really look at how other jurisdictions interact with the intellectual property system to be able to raise those kind of income. And then when we are talking about intellectual property generally, we are talking about an integrated toolkit that is capable of not only generating revenue, but solving a lot of social, political, and economic issues in a particular country. When we are at the time when we are talking about gender parity, creative, cultural and creative industry is an industry that is all encompassing and that gives level ground. So, in this case, how much do you know about intellectual property and cultural and creative industry?
So if I understand your question, you're asking how much do I know about securitization of intellectual property in the creative and cultural industries?
I'm only trying to create an enabling ground for my comments.
Oh, okay.
You understand?
Oh, but sir, we are not necessarily taking comments. We are taking questions, sir. Can we have another mic, please? The mic is not working.
So when we talk about creativity in the intellectual property arena, the copyrights, trademarks, patent, industrial design, how much interactive are they? That is another thing. So at last, what do we do as a public institutions? What do you do as an intermediary? And what do the private sector do in terms of valuation of intangible assets in this country? Thank you.
Thank you. I actually think that's a very good question, loaded, but very good. So to me, I'll just summarize the question saying, how do we get the different arms of intellectual property working together to securitize intellectual property? I actually think it starts with the philosophy. And if you see how I had gone through my presentation, I broke down the philosophy of intellectual property protection, obviously speaking from the perspective of copyright, which is what we're discussing today. And I broke down the understanding of intellectual property as a social good, a product for social good, and that whole process. So if we are looking at policies and we're saying we understand that the products of creative work can be good for society because it employs people, it solves problems, etc., etc., then our policies will be directed at backing these creative works, right? If we have a policy to back creative works, then the issue of IP being sufficient collateral for capital is solved. It actually isn't some very complicated thing. It's simply a mindset reset. And we have to understand that we're not asking Nigeria to do things that have not been done in other countries. A beautiful example of an entire state in the US, one of the richest states in the US, that is driven and backed by intellectual property. They have the film industry in Los Angeles. They have the tech industry in San Francisco. These are all IP-based industry. And the reason why there needs to be a policy change that puts IP as a valid form of collateral is there is actually a way to say, to evaluate IP to an extent. And it's simple. I create a product. Can I, if I run the product through the value chain, which by the way, I actually had, Ugo, we had in the slide the value chain, but somehow I skipped it. Yeah, we had actually done value chain. Can we go back to the slide, please? We had actually done value chain breakdowns for at least like 4 of the main sectors for you to understand how it flows. So if I understand that I create a product, this is how I distribute it to market, that is the money flow. So we're not actually asking you to collateralize Father Christmas. No, it's actually a real business. So the first thing that the government needs to do, and what we're doing today is part of it, is to actually understand the value chains of these sectors and how they work. What is the route to market? So we are done like a rough, sorry, we're lawyers, we're not economists. So if PwC did this, it probably look like sexier, but this was what we could do. And so we did rough, just value chain speculations of how do these creative works move in some of these rights. So you can see here, audiovisual works, financiers. Financiers are not just banks. There's also private equity firms. There's family and friends, which is how the sector is primarily funded. The circle of family and friends, right? And then you have producers. These are the guys that have the ideas, but they need the money. to back the ideas, right? And then they produce the work. For them to produce the work, what do they need? Talent. Also, as I'm doing this, just be thinking about the people. Just think about how many people are involved in this process, how many people are employed in this process, how much money is potentially moving through the economy in this process. So they need talent, and talent is not just for the visual, it's not just the people on screen that you see. It's all the people, the cameraman, the sound man, the costumier. There are so many people. One production set alone can employ up to 100 people for a certain number of days, earning a certain day rate. So do the maths, right? And then if they have a CMO, the talent, they might earn royalties. Who pays the royalties? The users, because the distributors make sure it gets to the users. Now, I'm not going into certain specifics like what exactly are the exhibition platforms. You have cinema, you have video on demand like Netflix and Amazon. You have DVD and CD, which is still a viable market in Nigeria, by the way, but slowly dying, but still a viable market in Nigeria. You know, you have CD, DVD, you have YouTube, free to air, you know, but you make the money from ads. You have TV, you know, broadcast. So if I understand this as a policymaker, I don't think that I necessarily need to know this is the exact amount of money you are going to make, because the truth of the matter is that no one can really guarantee that. Anyone that says they can guarantee that to you is lying. You cannot guarantee this is it. But what you can guarantee is that there is a cash flow. So what the government needs to do, if we really want to have the conversation about securitizing IP, is one, we need to understand the value chain. Now, if we understand the value chain, then we can invest our money better. And I remember I trained Bank of Industry recently, and I know, Mr. Uche, you were busy that day. Some of your people were not happy with some of the things I said. I seem to have a habit of not making people happy these days. But I like to think that one day people will understand me and understand what I'm trying to say. And one of the things I said is, as much as I say BOI is the biggest investor in the creative industry, period. And that investment has revolutionized certain things like the cinema sector. But I felt that BOI funding productions, was an error. And when you look at how funding is done by government, this is government funding. Government never gives loans for productions. If they were going to fund a production, it would be by virtue of a grant, because that's the highest risk area of the business. And apart from that being the highest risk area of the business, if you don't have your other exploitation value chain, that investment has failed at the first instance. And I can see Bank of Industry is changing its strategy now. I hope I'm right. I'm just sitting from the outside. I'm not inside. And maybe not investing as much in financing individual productions, but investing more in other enabling aspects of the value chain. Here. This is where the money is made. The exploitation platforms. We don't have enough legitimate exploitation areas in the country. And you can see the impact of Bank of Industry investments in cinema. But we need more. We need more screens. We need our own video on demand platforms. And I actually think the biggest investment we need in Nigeria is in television. And Chijoke's presentation showed that broadcasting is actually the leading sector. And in every country in the world, the television industry, especially for audiovisual, is the foundation. Why? Because it is on 24 hours a day. It's literally that simple. It is generating income 24 hours a day. So I feel that we have to understand the value chain. That's the beginning. If we know where the money flow goes, then it's not so scary to say I will collateralize the IP because I know where the money flow goes. And two, I'm not saying collateralize blindly. What are the checks when you collateralize? That's another thing. I always like to use audiovisual because I think it has a very complex system of checks if done properly. Now, I'm a producer. I want you to finance my production, right? Now, for me to finance your production, I'll say, fine, get a completion bond. You know why? One, you can go over budget because you are over time. In a film production or a television production, for every additional day, your budget goes up because most people who are on that production are there at a day rate, right? So I want you to have a completion bond because the most important thing for me is that that project is completed. So that is the money you are going to access if you run out of the budget that we've agreed. But what does the completion bond really do apart from that? The financial institution that gives the completion bond does not want to pay out that money. They don't want to take the risk. What are they going to do? They're going to monitor your production and make sure that it's delivered on time and on budget. So you have essentially used an insurance mechanism to monitor your investment. And you can replicate those types of checks and balances when you are making those investments without putting in obligations that are choking. So there is a tightrope that we need to walk, and I understand the challenges. We are dealing in a country that is not creditworthy in the sense that we don't have records of people. I can take money from Nigeria today and disappear to Cotonou. God knows whether we'll find you. You know, so it's scary to say, let's even give somebody money with collateral even. And then you say you want to give somebody money with an intangible collateral. Is even more scary. My argument would be that there is an in-between all of that where we can collateralize intellectual property, first by understanding the value chain, by investing in the areas that open up the industry, prioritizing those areas. Chijioke, prioritize the areas that open up the industry because you understand the value chain, and then putting in appropriate checks but you have to make sure that the checks are not suffocating in itself. And that is even the biggest challenge. I see Mrs. Uche has a hand up. Please, can somebody get a mic to her? Because I would love to have BOI respond.
Okay, thank you very much, Isioma, for the opportunity. Usually, when you started the free Zoom meeting, I was involved. That was why I recommended that we should meet again. But for the purpose of responding to some of the things you've said here, I also know that we have to meet. We need to talk a lot. And Chijioke, we need to also discuss. You've been working with Isioma. You should have mentioned so much about BOI. We started in 2011. And where we started, we didn't go into the industry as having the information. What we did was we worked with stakeholders in the industry. British Council was a very great partner to Bank of Industry. We identified stakeholders in all the subsectors within the bigger cultural and creative industry, including tourism. So we did the mapping of the industry. After the mapping, we identified about 15 or 16 subsectors, which I'll also make available to us when we meet. Thereafter, we had a study tour. So you could see that BOI didn't just start by not understanding the value chain of one subsector, which is content. We tried to understand the industry as an industry in Nigeria. So we did a study tour. We went around to UK. We partnered with the financiers there and some of the stakeholders. We also were in Canada, and we found out that they were doing a lot, But the interesting thing for us as Nigerians is that we should be very proud of our younger ones. For all the studios we visited with great pedigree, there was no studio that we did not see up to 40% of Nigerian youths leading and doing the best in those sectors. So we're very proud of our findings. Thank you very much. And even when we got to the UK, we also found out too that our youths were also doing a lot in the industry. After our study, the report we got that was submitted to the then management was that if we invest $1 billion, 99% of that amount will be lost. But for us, because we didn't go there just to pick their information, we also came here. We met with those in different subsectors. Idumota, Kanu, Kaduna, we worked with Sani Muazu. When somebody said Sani, I thought he was around. And we gathered information, and we also reported to management that if we had people in Nigeria in that industry, and the industry has grown to be second best in the world, that means there's something there. So management approved and we started. Our first project was the distribution company, Film House Cinema. So we started with where we can drive what we have. Content had issues, and what was it? Quality. Yes, people were also consuming our content, irrespective of the quality. So the bank came in to support content in the area of improving the quality, because what we had was just quality problem. And not that they didn't know what to do, not that we didn't have the skilled intellectuals that could do that. They were all staying abroad, and they were also ready to come back to contribute. So I would like to disabuse that belief that we started supporting producers wrongly. What projects the creativity we have? It is content. The content, the producers will tell our stories. And when they go to locations, where do they go to? They use most of those subsectors within the creative industry. And when we project this in form of films, in form of series, in form of music, it travels faster than that cinema in Surulere, in Ikeja, or in Abuja. They will see the content first. You gave us a reference about the cruise. They talked about wedding party, but they didn't mention Silverbed. But we supported Silverbed. So we understand the value chain, and we have, I'll stand boldly to say that we have information about how we can financially support the growth of this industry. And if you're setting up committees, it would be very good to have reference to BOI, because we've worked and we have information on all the sectors. Then the next has to do with intellectual property. Understanding the chain will not confirm the value. Because are you looking at the product that was produced in the past, that has gone through all the distribution chains, and had made all the funds? What is the value as of today? If you're saying of a new product that has just been produced and has not gone to any form of distribution, no monetization, no commercialization, then you can start guessing on values. But not a content that has gone around and they have it in their library, and somebody is saying, I have 10 content in my collection, place a value on it. What value? If I take it to a Netflix, what value? What are the markets? What are they paying? I can tell you what we are getting for even high budget films from the off-takers. So we still have a lot. It will be very good for us to work together because there must be collateral to back the fund. If you're giving out and you're not able to get out, back the funds, you can't give us new funds. So we need to have it. And I'm also happy to say, even if we started with content and we dragged, today we can start both to see that our NPL, non-performing loan under creative industry, is still below 2%. It's a thing of pride.
This shows a very viable sector.
Yeah, it's a thing of pride for us in Nigeria. And we've supported how many projects? And interestingly, since we started, over 24 projects have collected money and fully liquidated their debt. That's a pride. So let's talk more. Let's not criticize what we've done. We started well.
No, but I think,
And
thank you
let's
so
have
much.
what to do
I think we
better.
obviously are going to talk more, but I think I want the economist among us to assist me in a further response. Ugo, please, okay. I think definitely, Ma, we have a lot to talk about, and we've continued to interface in different ways, and I think we definitely need to have a conversation. I think people who want the industry to grow need to continue to dialogue. And it's okay for us to have a difference of opinion on the way forward, because it is in those discussions that I always think the solutions or the aha moment is discovered. Chioke, please.
Yeah, and thank you. And thank you, Madam Uche. And I think, every time she talks about, the work she's done, I don't know, I've told her that she doesn't sing her praise, she doesn't blow her trumpet enough. The process of getting money from BOI, the knowledge that sits within that desk, that's kind of what de-risks the money they give out, because they have the benefit of knowledge and all that she's talked about in terms of the way they've engaged. That's actually what de-risks it. That's why you'd have 2% NPL. That's phenomenal. That's why I started clapping. Yeah. But I think, we also have to start looking at the way things have evolved. And if I want to use a film like maybe Living in Bondage, at the first time, maybe when it was produced in the 90s, if someone was going to value the IP at that time, I'm not sure how the person would have, or what value the person would have put on it in 1990 when that film was first made. Okay? And if someone were even going to sell the rights to the story and everything, probably the person that bought the rights to that story bought it for a pittance, right? But they've now made Living in Bondage the second one now. And you can see the significant value sitting in that story. And you can see that, Netflix has optioned, has bought or it's showing on Netflix, I believe, or it's going to go to Netflix, right? Yeah. So if we start looking at the evolution of the industry, and we start looking at, some of the track records and things we've done, it may not necessarily be the right response to say that something has gone through all the channels and made all the money and you're not able to then see whether you can actually realize further value from that particular product. So I keep saying data, I keep saying with the growth and with structure, you're able to start monetizing. Today, I have people reaching out to me to say, Netflix has optioned our story and we're going to produce, a Netflix original, but we need to know how to value the IP. And these are Nigerian producers. So I quite understand Madam Uche's point, but I think, the industry has evolved a bit more and we need to now start looking critically at it. And there has to be a basis. There has to be a basis for being able to value this, right? If someone, I keep saying it, the people that did that Netflix, that Living in Bondage or Rattlesnake. Now Rattlesnake is in the theaters now. Or I think about maybe if someone wants to do a passport of Malam Ilya, if someone wants to make that into a film, I think that's a phenomenal film to make because there'll be Arabian Nights and everything. Don't tell me.
It's already happening.
It's already happening. So that's what I'm saying. But
looking for money.
No, but if you start thinking about those stories, are you trying to tell me that we can't have a significant valuation attached to that? So the how, and I hear you, but the how is what she's trying to say because there has to be a basis, right? And we can't here today, legislate on what the basis would be. But the point we're saying is there even has to be a starting point. Okay. So I guess that's where we are coming from, the starting point.
All right, sorry, let's take this to lunch. We'll sit together. But we have some online questions that are pending, and I really have to take it because our online audience has been amazing. They've been really amazing. So I'm going to have to take some online questions. I have a question here from Ms. Abidoye, who I know is the Executive Vice President of Chocolate City Music Nigeria. She's one of our biggest indigenous labels. And she's asking to the NCC, can the NCC please give a clear response on the status of COSON at the moment? We knew that we're not going to avoid this question today. That's one question. And then she also asked a second question. She asked if the NCC is doing anything about setting up a copyright board that would deal with the issue of tariffs, of tariffing. So I think this is not a question for me to answer. I think this is a question for the NCC to answer. Okay. The mic is coming.
My name is Edi Emesiri. I represent the Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria. My question goes to NCC. Please, how soon will you sanitize the issues of overlap of representation of the CMOs? How soon will you sanitize the issues of overlap of representation of CMOs? Then, how soon too will you also include broadcast materials? Because your concentration right now is only on movies by producers and all that, but broadcast materials are never considered in your legislations.
Okay, so let me even ask the copyright board question. Well, it really reads exactly like this. I would like to know what the NCC is doing about establishing a copyright board. Can we establish this to help set up the proper tariff, especially as it pertains to broadcasting? There are also some other questions. Ms. Abidoye is very engaged today. She then asked one more question. Is it possible for the government to give support to CMOs to fund some of the tools required for tracking, being that most of the complaints from CMOs are with respect to the cost of getting these tools to track? Can they put together some sort of grants or loans to support this? My answer would be certainly that can be done. And I think, yes, to support the CMOs with tracking, setting up funds for that. I'm sure that that can be done. I don't think it might not necessarily be NCC giving them the fund, but I'm sure NCC can work with them to access some funds. I would assume that's NCC's answer. Okay, so, sir, would you want to take those questions? I'm not sure they'll be very happy.
Well, thank you so much. And to say again that for those who have been waiting patiently online, I mean, it's good to know that they waited all this while, and they deserve some response or responses to the questions. I'll do my best to see the ones I can answer with a straightforward response. Well, the one from Chocolate City is I should clarify the status of COSON at the moment. I think the easiest way to say that is that COSON is in court at the moment, challenging the actions and the position of the Nigerian Copyright Commission. So to that extent, I would not comment on what is in court. will await the outcome of the action in court. But I would just say here that it's very instructive. In the last presentation, one of the things I think Ishama made that point is how the litigation often ties everyone down, and it doesn't help the system to run so well. If not for that litigation, maybe I would have been able to give a clear answer, but until the case is resolved in court, COSON remains in court. Establishing of the Copyright Board, I think there is a dispute resolution panel, and what we hope we will be able to achieve in the next, the revised regulations, is to make the arbitration process more proactive and more involving. I want to see the NCC play a more defining role when issues of tariffs arise. At the moment, we see a lot of more strength on the side of CMOs, and very often users at some disadvantage. But we always advise them to raise a red flag, and the NCC will use the mechanism available to address the tariffs as they were. How soon we will sanitize the overlaps of CMOs? Hopefully, by the time we are revising the regulations now, that is an area we must look at. It's not only Nigeria, and I know that Kenya tried to find a solution to that. How well they succeeded is a different thing, but they had 3 CMOs and they tried to work out some arrangements. But I think in Nigeria, if we look in that direction, we might be able to work out a framework that will reduce the cost of administration, and by so doing, save money and put more money in the pockets of the right owners, and minimize the squabbles around collections and licensing. The broadcast materials, I didn't quite understand that question, but if it's about the materials that broadcasting organizations themselves also create or own, I think it would be good to be able to put some light on that. And one thing we found, if you audit the copyright space, the CCI space, you find that a lot of people indeed have assets that they've not really been able to activate in terms of making money from that. And we saw that with the audiovisual, sorry, the visual, the artists anyway, you know, the visual arts industry. We've seen that with them. And I think with broadcasters, there are some materials that we may get back to. If that's not the question, I will look at it more probably when I understand it. Now, on whether government can support CMOs for tracking, I think we must find a way of using technology to track the works and make it easy. And I think MCSN already has something that they've developed to assist them in tracking the use of works. And even at the NCC end of it, I think we should also be able to see some of that going on and be able to verify whatever comes from the CMOs with what we are able to track from our own end. So technology has to be used as a tool to drive not only the whole process, but also to help verify the incomes and hopefully get more money to the right owners. Sorry.
We have situations where you watch some movies and you find out that the producers have used broadcast some materials produced by broadcast organizations in their movie. They make money from it, but the broadcast organs don't make money from it. 2, NBC has a very robust monitoring unit. So instead of duplicating issues by trying to set up your own, if you liaise with NBC, because we have, in broadcasting organizations, we have a playlist we set up all the time, which your people come to ask for. But what happens is that some come to say we represent Nigerian and foreign musical rights owners. And we say, look, it would be better, for instance, let me just use 2. COSON comes to say we represent Nigerian musical owners. Then MCSN comes, we represent both Nigerian and foreign. it will be cheaper for you to deal with an organization that has both local and foreign, because you pay once. Instead of having to pay for COSON, and then tomorrow MCSN comes to say pay for the foreign items you have used. So it becomes a bit difficult. That's why I was talking about streamlining it and seeing how we can at least deal with one in one particular area. But we also lose income by not trying to consider broadcast materials that are used by other industries. If you go to some other things, we buy rights, for instance, for football. And yet, if you go to some bars during football, during the football season, you see them playing, selling drinks, and people will come to watch European League. But the rights have been paid for by somebody, but we're not protected.
Thank you, sir. I'm so sorry, we're not going to be able to take any more questions online or offline because time is fast spent, but you can engage the NCC or any of Chijioke or myself after the end of this. After this question, I mean, if you have any further questions, but this will be the last question. Sir, please, I would like you to come up on the podium for your concluding remarks as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, just while I'm coming up for my concluding remarks, and I mean, my response to the last comments might just be my concluding remarks, and that's to say that this should be an ongoing conversation. And once again, I would thank AFD, I thank Punuka for the wonderful work done, and I thank KPMG for that insight. We've all seen gaps, and we've seen that there is so much work to be done. A lot of work. I mean, it's still work in progress. What I promised we're going to do is, based on the notes we have taken, we'll compare notes with AFD, with Punuka, and with other core participants, and then see the points of engagement. Some of that will kickstart at launch. Already there is the BOI, Punuka, KPMG, and other like minds table. There will be the policy, core policy drivers table, and there will be the critical stakeholders table, there will be the CMO table. So there's going to be a lot, the Liberian table. So I think at launch, we will kickstart all the discussions. The ones we cannot finish at launch, we will roll to the next time we'll meet. But one thing I have taken away here is that we must begin the building of trust and confidence, and that's across the whole divide. At the end of the day, what matters most, or should matter for us, is that Nigeria should get it right, and we should not keep seeing statistics as potentials. We should see those statistics coming out as the deliverables that right owners will begin to feel. It doesn't matter if the Nollywood in Nigeria is number 2, the film industry is number 2 in the world. If our right owners here are not feeling the impact, in their bank accounts, then we've not achieved much. And I would say that all the investment by government to intervene and to help the industry will go to waste if at the end of the day, the industry stakeholders are not the better for it. And I think that is why we must not relent, and we must continue to engage, and hopefully we'll get there. I think 2021 will be very defining from the Nigerian Copyright Commission perspective. It should be defining. The bill, hopefully, will become an act in 2021. The CMO regulations will be revised in 2021. And we're going to try and interface with more stakeholder groups. And hopefully, we might also get piracy under some control in 2021 with our national action plan against piracy. So with that, I hope we can manage to have some good launch, hoping that things will get better for every one of us, and the creative industry in Nigeria will have a turnaround as we wrap up the year. Thank you so much. And once again, my brother from NBC, Prof, you're welcome. Good to have you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll give the owners of the event, our host.
Thank you, Director General. Thank you, Isioma. Thank you, Chijioke, for your presentations. Thank you to everybody online on Zoom. And for those who are in Abuja, you are all invited to have lunch in the main building. Thank you.